Hi, I'm Colleen Van Lent, and I'm happy to welcome you to Introduction to HTML5. I'm very excited to teach this course because I love the idea that we finally will have some course that will really explain the basics to as many people as possible. I love working with people and I love working with technology, and I think the best thing we can do is have as many people involved as possible to really make sure that we're building things that everyone can use. So in this course, we will be covering the basics. I really can't emphasize enough that we will be starting at the very basic building blocks. So we'll start off talking about what's called syntax and semantics. What are the actual code that people write in order to make a web page a web page? And are there any special meanings behind any of these words that can convey special information to those who may not be able to access the web the same way I do? So perhaps someone who uses special accessibility tools. After we cover the syntax and semantics, we're going to talk more about this accessibility idea that I just alluded to. This idea that if we're going to build a web page, what do we need to do to make sure the most people as possible can access the information? We're also going to be talking about getting started in technology and writing code. And when I mean talking about getting started, I mean really talking about getting started. Right down to you and I are going to walk through together on how we're going to create a file. One of the things I think that really trips people up when they're starting to learn computer science or any type of technology-based criteria or curriculum is that professors or instructors say, let's get started, here's your homework, go ahead and do it, and everyone just kind of stops because they're not sure where to get started. I really want to be there for you to show you how to get started and get off on the right foot. So let's talk about what we'll cover in this course. In week 1, the focus is on questions. It's not on coding, it's on questions. So I want you to understand what happens when you type something into the URL. If you type in www.introwebdesign.com, how is this page magically appearing in front of your browser? I also want to talk to you about what types of tools you are going to need in order to code. So we're going to talk about editors and browsers and other different software tools because I want you to know right from the start what you're going to need in order to succeed in this class. Finally, we're really going to talk about HTML5. What happened to HTML1? What happened to HTML2? What is this evolution of what's going on with web design and the languages we used? So in week 1, again, almost no coding, really just giving you an idea of how the web works and why it's important for you to be able to interact with people and with code that's being used to create your sites. Week 2, we're going to talk a little bit of theory and then, unfortunately for some people, a lot of code. So there's this idea of something called the document object model upon which all web pages are built. If I can get you to understand just a little bit about that, then later on, if you decide to go off and use WordPress or some other software to make your own website, you're going to be able to really understand what's going on so much better. We're going to talk about things called contextual tags and headings and different things we can use to make our site have different meanings and different appearances. We're going to talk about links, images, lists, tables, and also multimedia in case you would like to add any video or audio to your site. Week 3, we're really going to put it all together. At this point, you should know just enough about HTML5 where you'll be dangerous, where you can create something that works but doesn't work all the time. So in week 3, we're going to put it together, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that are often overlooked, such as validating your code. How can we make sure that the code that you wrote doesn't just look good, it's syntactically correct. It's going to work everywhere. So again, when we validate your code, we'll talk about the syntax, but we'll also talk about accessibility, which is, hey, we validated your code to make sure the rules are there, but let's also validate and make sure that the meaning is there as well. Finally, we'll talk about what's called domain name registration and web hosting, because it's a lot more fun to make websites if you can actually put it out there on the internet and let your friends and family see it as well. Finally, we'll work on a final project where you will put together a lot of the different things that you've been learning. You are going to create what we call a syntactically valid multi-page website. So your site will have at least 2 to 3 pages. After you've done your coding, you'll run it through to make sure it validates and it's very accessible. So your final project is actually going to be something that's a little bit ugly, I'm going to admit to right now, because we're not going to be talking about styling, we're not talking about different things. I really just want you to understand the HTML5 language, and that's all about content. So let's talk logistics. Let's talk about who this class is for. Who am I aiming for my kind of star student? I'm really looking forward to teaching the complete beginner, all right? This class is not for those people who were building a computer down in their basement when they were 12 years old. I mean, you're very welcome to hang out with us, but we are really here to talk about how we, through persistence, can create a website. One of the things that I'm kind of anti about is the word passion. Now, I'm passionate about teaching you this material, but I don't really feel like you need to be passionate about technology or passionate about computing to really get a lot out of this class. Instead, it's about persistence. I'd like you to just hang in there and learn enough that you can go off and really help people build better technology. So a little bit about who I am. I have a PhD in computer science, which is really the least important part of my qualifications to teach this class. Instead, I have 2 decades of teaching experience, and I have taught a wide range of different students. My emphasis has always been on education. And I'm somewhat famous for running around the classroom, helping people debug their code, finding out what's going on here, finding out what's going on there. So this whole idea of teaching this class is kind of novel to me because I'm sitting here, not moving. So the important part is that I really do care about people succeeding, and so I'm hoping that I can help you take your skills to the next level. Here's what everyone wants to know. In this class, what kind of workload will there be and how will you be evaluated? There are going to be weekly videos. Some of them are like this, a lecture format. You should really feel free to watch them anywhere. But I'd also like to include some videos that are going to be much more demo format. And by that, I mean you really want to watch the video with the computer next to you so you can type along and test it out and try it. There will be weekly readings. Most of them will be from a free online textbook, but there may be some other online articles I include as well if I happen to come across something that's very timely for what we've been learning. There will be weekly assessments, typically in the form of quizzes, and there will be that final project. And I put in here warning it will be ugly. I don't mean that the process will be ugly. I think you'll find it very straightforward. It's just, again, I can't emphasize enough that this class is about the language HTML5. It's not about creating beautiful sites. It's about you really learning just the building blocks. And it's always so much easier to build something ugly the first time than build something beautiful. So how will you succeed in this class? In a perfect world, you would be coding with 2 or 3 other people and you'd be talking and you'd never be coding alone. So I'm hoping that you'll create a community, probably through the message boards. I need you to work smart. One of the things that kills me is when people say, oh, I spent 3 or 4 hours working on this. I never want to hear that from a student. Instead, I feel that if you've ever run into a problem when you're coding, you should stop after 10, 15, 20 minutes max and go walk away. Go get help from someone, take a break, think about something else. It's all about working smart, not necessarily hard. Next, you really need to learn how to look things up on your own. There is no way I can teach you everything you need to know about HTML5, and you wouldn't want me to. It'd be very boring. Instead, you need to feel the confidence to go out and use search engines to look up the topics that you're interested in. My job is to give you those keywords and key ideas so you know what it is you want to search for. Finally, you really need to practice, practice, practice. You will not succeed in this course unless you've written the code yourself and really tried to muster your way through some of the mistakes and typos that you're going to have. So let's just review. Once again, this class is for beginners, and I'm excited to have you join us. When you're done with this class, you will have the ability to write and understand HTML5 code. So you're not leaving as a developer, but you are going to leave as someone who understands code. And finally, one of the key things that I'm going to stress throughout this whole course is that you will understand the importance of accessibility in technology. If when this course was done, I had even one student who said, hey, you know what? I'm going to go on and I might not be a coder, but I am going to go work with somebody else to help make their code more accessible, I would be thrilled with that. So welcome to the course, and I hope you have a lot of fun as you learn more about HTML5. Hi, today we're going to be talking about HTML5, specifically what it is and why we aren't learning HTML1 instead. So what is HTML? HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. Markup languages are actually very common. They're not the same as programming languages. Instead, they're special languages that use tags to annotate or mark up documents. In HTML, the tags tell the browsers where you want to put headings, images, lists, links, etc. A .html file is a special kind of file. You've already seen special file extensions before. Whenever you open a file that has .doc, your computer knows to open it in Microsoft Word. If you see a file with .ppt, your computer knows, oh, that's a PowerPoint file. I should open it in PowerPoint. In the same way, when your computer sees a .html file, it knows that it should open it in an internet browser such as Chrome, Firefox, or Safari. Your browser can read this file and it knows how to display it on the screen. It's more than that. HTML file tags also allow screen readers and other assistive devices to utilize the tags to present the information in new and special ways. So HTML is very similar to English. You can understand it even if you don't know much about it. Let's look at this example HTML file over here. Most of it is just typical English language. This is an important heading, or hi there, I'm going to include a link to the course page. But if you look closely, you can see we've added these little tiny tags that the browser uses to know how to represent the material. So H1 is just a heading tag. It says to the browser, hey, this is something really important. I want you to put it in bigger font, and also if someone's using an assistive device, I want them to know this is something important. H2 is also displays some sort of importance, but not as much. I have a P tag for paragraph, and I have another tag down here called an anchor tag to let the browser know I don't want you to just show this material, I want you to actually link it to a different web page. So here's the output when any browser would look at our code. In the beginning, learning HTML is mostly about learning all those different tags that I showed you in that file. This is called learning the syntax. It's how you learn which brackets to use, backslashes, and different things like that. You spend most of your time going, oh, did I remember that tag and did I write it the right way? That's very short-lived. In just a little amount of time, you're going to gain the confidence to not worry about your syntax and instead to be thinking about the semantics or the meaning behind the tags. How important is this information that I'm trying to get across, and is this the right tag to be using? If someone's searching my page, can they find what they're looking for even if they can't see the text? Can they use the tags to navigate through it? So what happened to HTML1? Why are we using something called HTML5? Well, let's talk about the early years. HTML was created in 1990 as a way to electronically connect different documents via hyperlinks, hence this idea of a web of connections. What was happening is that scientists were using the internet to list their different research papers, and you would have a long list, each paper independent of the other. But HTML gave you ways that you could read a paper and right within the text link to another exciting physics paper. Because the audience for HTML tended to be people like my dad up there in the corner, they were nuclear physicists. They didn't care about things such as color, images, or anything that wasn't science related. And that was the key. HTML was intended to work across any platform. And in order to do this, you really had to avoid things such as special fonts or different colors, or anything that really was more about layout than content. However, in 1993, Mosaic emerged as the first graphical browser. And what that means is that it was the first browser to actually introduce the idea of images. And when that happened, there was a lot of debate among the research community as to whether or not this was a good thing. The pioneers really wanted to keep it simple, content-based, let everyone access it. But the innovators were saying no. People like pictures, they like layout, they like that even as much as they like the content. So there was a big battle between how the internet should evolve from that point. So after Mosaic emerged, the use of the internet just absolutely exploded, and more people were using it for commercial means instead of just for doing research. Mosaic had challengers though, in the form of Netscape, Internet Explorer, and other browsers. This was the start of what we call the browser wars. Each of these browsers decided that they wanted to create these proprietary tags that would only work on their browser. Some of the examples were Marquee, where you could have scrolling text, or Blink, which would only work on some of the browsers and not others. Other tags weren't proprietary, they actually worked on any browser, but they went against the original spirit of HTML. They were tags such as font, or center for centering your text, or background color. This may not sound like a bad thing, but some computers didn't have the access, didn't have the ability to have all the different colors that other computers might have. And this led to some really ugly looking pages. It also led to the origination of what we call the best viewed on messages. When you went to a site, you were almost immediately told which browser you should really view the site on, otherwise you weren't going to get the optimal experience. We in a way suffer from browser wars or best viewed on images today. Many times when you go to a page, you'll see that you can't actually access the full content if you're on your phone unless you click on a link to the full website. So how did this happen? How did we get to the point where different browsers weren't agreeing on the different roles that HTML should play? This comes back to the idea that no one runs the internet or the web. However, some groups have taken a more proactive role to try to help standardize what's going on out there. The first is the Internet Engineering Task Force. They really focus on the idea of how the different networks should collaborate and how they should work together. The World Wide Web Consortium instead deals with HTML and the evolution of HTML. They want to know what kind of tags the browsers should and should not support. Finally, one of the newest groups is the Web Accessibility Initiative. They want to make sure that no matter how people are accessing the web, they have the same ability to view the content. We had this evolution of browsers that we've been talking about. In 1990 to 94, it was all very simple, text-based. In 93, we talked about how the images entered the scene and pretty much exploded the internet. Cross-browser compatibility made many of the web pages just fall apart and led to incredibly ugly code. In the beginning of 2000, browsers went back to this idea of separating content from style. And in 2005, it became standard practice to use HTML files, which we'll be learning about in this course, to create the content, and CSS files to style it. So as the browsers evolved, so too did HTML. The way it tends to work in most computer science and technology fields is that it's the coders and the developers who push the standards. So as coders learned that there were more and more things they wanted the ability to do, it's the browser's job to keep up. So where are we now? HTML5 is a cooperation between the W3C and the Web Hypertext Application Technology Working Group. And what they've done is they've established these 4 guidelines for how HTML5 should be approached as browsers go to support it. The first idea is that new features should be based on HTML, CSS, which is the styling language, the DOM, and JavaScript. Nothing more. They want to reduce the need for external plugins. It's very frustrating when you're on a browser and you find that you can't watch the video that somebody posted. They also want to move so that markup, or the markup language, can replace scripting. If you find that more and more developers are writing code to make something happen, get rid of the code and just make a simple tag that can do it instead. And finally, HTML5 should be device independent. It shouldn't matter whether you're on your phone, your laptop, a PC, or even on a screen reader. You want everyone to have the same access to the information. So when you think back over this video, there are certain lessons I really hope stick with you. The first is the idea that HTML is not a programming language, but rather a way that browsers can translate documents into viewable web pages. HTML was intended to facilitate many different content types: images, pictures, links, lists, everything along that line. What we've found throughout the history of the internet is that when designers want to do something, they tend to write non-standard code to force browsers to do it. So this is why we're developing new standards in HTML5 to handle these new requirements that people desire and push browsers to adopt the new standards. Today, let's talk about the request-response cycle, or basically what happens when you type something into the address bar of your browser. One of the things I think is really funny, and I'm guilty of it as well, is that we all do things and we have no idea how they work. So if I were to ask you, when you type in an address, what happens? So this lecture is actually one of the most technical of this entire class. I don't want you to feel like you need to memorize this or write it down, but I do think it'll help you understand a little bit more what's going on as you learn HTML5. So one of the things you might want to understand is the client-server relationship. Servers are basically machines that hold all the resources, and our hope is that they're always connected to the network. Clients are what we're using. We're the machines that you use for personal use, like laptops, phones, etc. Let me show you in this picture. It's really common to use networks such as something called a LAN or a WAN. A LAN is a local area network. And so what I have right here is this idea that we can have 3 different computers and they're all sharing one server. Why would we want to do that? Well, a lot of times you only have one printer or one of the different resources. This way, all 3 machines can work together and share that one resource. So the LAN is the local area network. Sometimes you want to have something larger or a wide area network. So in movies where the good guy is breaking into the building to steal the software, what's typically happened is they have this server that everyone who works in the building can access, but no one outside the building. Or you can even have it across different buildings, but you don't want anyone from the outside to really be able to get your information. So a local area network is kind of like your office building. A wide area network might be a university where you want to be able to share servers across multiple buildings. The largest wide area network is, of course, the internet. So now we get back to that question of what happens when you type something into the URL. What you're doing is that you, the client, are requesting a web page, and the server needs to respond with the appropriate files. So when you type something in, this is called the URL. And every URL has 3 parts. The protocol, how you want to connect, the domain, which is the server, and then optionally you can include the document. So even though you're typing in one URL, one of the things to realize is that usually you're actually requesting lots and lots of files all at once. So the protocols that most people have seen, the first one is HTTP, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. The second one, HTTPS, is the same idea, only now we're having a more secure protocol. So if you're ever connecting to a bank or any place where you're putting in passwords, make sure that the first thing you see in that URL is HTTPS. If you don't connect. The third one is called the File Transfer Protocol, and it's a little bit different. When you see HTTP, it's kind of expecting that you're going to give back and forth HTML5 code. With FTP, it could be any type of file. So we have the protocol. Now let's talk about what the domain names represent. Usually the domain names are something recognizable, such as umich.edu would be for University of Michigan, google.com, wikipedia.org. So each of these sites has a different top-level domain. How did you get them? How do some people get to be .edu and some .com, some .biz, etc.? Well, they're actually determined by ICANN, and their job is to go in and decide which types of organizations qualify for different domains. I've included a link here if you want. You can go and see what the different types are. But the important thing to know is that your domain name is actually mapped to an address. And in the old days, like when my dad was on the internet, if he wanted to connect to someplace, he would actually type in numbers, 185.261, etc., etc. Well, there's been a new version of IP addresses because every single client needs their own address. And if you think of how many people have laptops and smartphones, we need a lot of different options. So with these IP addresses, you basically have sets of numbers, you have these different sets right here where each X can represent one of 16 different values. So you can see we have a lot of options, over 300 trillion, in fact. As I said, luckily for you, the domain name server lets you type in something really simple like umich or Google, and it's the one that turns it into that really long number. The last part of your URL is the document. So sometimes you want to specify a very specific document that you want to get. So for instance, the contact page, or in this case, another one, I have the file that's inside a folder. But sometimes you don't put a document at all. In fact, most of the time you don't. If you type in wikipedia.org or facebook.com, there's no file name. But that's okay. Every server has a default every server has a default document that it's going to return. Usually it's called index.html. All right, so we figured it out. We know what it means when we're typing something in. We understand the request. What happens though once we type that in is we are actually going to get back a lot of information. Headers, cookies, form data, all the stuff that you don't see. So the important thing to know is that the server returns files, not web pages. For a lot of us, we're very visual. So when we type in a URL, we're looking and we're like, oh, here's my page. But sometimes the browser might be returning something for different types of screen readers, assistive technology. So it's not returning a web page, it's returning lots and lots of files. Hopefully. I will admit that sometimes the server can't fulfill the request. And if it can't, it'll send back an error code. I think a lot of you are familiar with 404, where it says file not found. That usually means you typed something in wrong. If you get a 500 error, that actually means that the server's down. So you may as well go have a snack, do something fun, come back later and type it in again. So I want to kind of do a live demo with you of what happens when we type something in. So I've written it down for you. It looks up the domain, the DNS returns an IP address, and then a whole bunch of files start to be returned. Let's take a look. What I've done here is I've gone to the School of Information site at the University of Michigan. I simply typed in si.umich.edu. I didn't type in the protocol because it usually just defaults. So what you see here visually is a page, student looking out, looking very inspired, etc. But now I'm going to do a little trick here where I right-click on the screen and I'm going to choose the option that says Inspect. And a little button, a window is going to pop up to the side here. And I'm going to say, you know what? I would like to see all the information that's being returned when I actually request this page. I'm requesting one page. I'm going to hit refresh. And if you look off to the side, don't worry that you can't see the details. But you should see that this single page is actually made up of lots and lots of files. And each one of these files was a separate request. Okay, so let's review. This was a kind of long video where really all I want you to come away from it with is the knowledge that every URL has those three parts: the protocol, the domain, and the document. And realize that what you're creating is bigger than just one file at a time. Every request-response cycle is usually lots and lots of rounds of communication between the client and the server. So we're going to start off small. We're going to do one file at a time. But you can always look ahead to building bigger and bigger web applications. One of the things you might notice is that there are a lot of different options for how you can view web pages. And these different options are called your different browsers. So different browsers have their pros and cons. I am not one of those people who gets really passionate about using one over the other. But I will tell you, as you become a web developer, if you decide to, you're going to want to know some of these differences. It's perfectly natural to have a preferred browser. For most people, it's whichever one was installed on their computer. But when you want to create websites, you might have one browser you use to look at things, but you really want to test your site on multiple browsers. So let's talk about some of the differences. First, we have Internet Explorer. And for a long time, it was the most popular browser, and that was just because it was the one that came with Microsoft Windows. It was platform dependent, and what that means is that it doesn't automatically work if you have a Mac. In 2015, Windows 10 came out, and instead of including Internet Explorer as the default, it's using something called Microsoft Edge. Edge is meant to replace Internet Explorer, so people who buy new computers are going to be using Edge. But don't forget, people don't buy new computers all the time, or even if they do buy a new computer, they might decide they still like Internet Explorer better. So you basically want to make sure that you're considering both browsers. Another option is Google Chrome. Google Chrome was developed by, surprise, Google, and it was a freeware that they created to be used on Microsoft Windows. However, it's later been ported, or you can consider it changed, so that it works on Linux, your Apple machines, your Android, basically most machines that you're going to come across. The nice thing about Google Chrome is that they really focused on security. So if that's something that you're kind of concerned about, Chrome is a good way to go. The next option is Firefox. Once again, the theme seems to be I'm always recommending free and open source browsers. What open source means is that they've actually shared their code with everyone for how they created Firefox. And this is a really great way to let people make suggestions and improvements to it. It's also available for Windows, Mac OS, Linux, and different BSD operating systems. So who's using the different browsers? Back in 2014, I can show you that Internet Explorer had a really big chunk of the market, right around there. You had Internet Explorer 11, Internet Explorer 10, Internet Explorer 9, etc. So they had the biggest chunk, and then Chrome was getting a lot bigger, as well as Firefox. Well, when we look over here at 2017, though, we can see that Chrome really made a big surge, and up to 64% of desktops and laptops were using Google Chrome, followed by Firefox, Internet Explorer, etc. This is always going to change. It's going to flux. You can't pick one browser and say, hey, this is the new one that everyone's going to be using. And the other interesting thing to kind of think about is, especially in this old map over here, people use really old browsers because people like to use what they're used to. One thing that I'm hoping all the students in my class take into consideration, though, is accessibility. Accessibility is basically the ability of a browser to support all these special functionalities and all these new HTML5 tags and all types of assistive technology. So one place you can go is this site, www.html5accessibility.com. And what you'll find at this site is how well the different browsers are supporting the tags. So you can see right now, Edge actually has 100% compliance, which isn't surprising because it's one of the newest browsers, so they had accessibility in mind right from the beginning. The other browsers were created before people were paying quite as much attention, so they're definitely making strides to get better and better. However, it is important to notice that Internet Explorer is at 56%, and since it's been basically relegated into the background, it's unlikely that it's going to get much better. So what I want you to take away from this is that browsers can really vary in how well they adhere to different standards. And different versions of browsers also need to be considered as well. Just because something didn't work in 2018 doesn't mean it won't work in 2019. So the best thing that you can do is write your code and then open it up in Safari and Firefox and Chrome, as many different browsers as you can. Not only will it make your site better, but it'll be a little bit interesting for you as you can look at the different ways that HTML5 is supported. Hi, today we're finally going to write some code, and I'm going to walk you through it by showing you how you can use an editor. One of the biggest pitfalls I've seen many of my students make is that they listen too carefully to what I'm saying rather than actually trying to dive in and start coding themselves. So while I encourage you to sit back and watch what I'm going to do right now, in a little bit I'm hoping you'll sit down and you'll code with me. The first step is that you need to create and edit your files. One of the biggest pitfalls you're going to encounter is that you'll be saving your files all over the place. You're not able to find them later on. So decide how you'll be organizing your files. What are you going to name your folder? Where are you going to put it? Second, you need to decide on a naming convention. This is just a fancy way of saying decide how you're going to name your files. So although many people use a Mac and you're allowed to use spaces in your file names, this is not something you want to do when you're writing code. So decide that if you have two words you want to put together, if you're going to use underscores to connect them, or something we call camel case, where you capitalize the first letter of each word. Just remember, never use spaces and be very consistent about your capitalization if you're going to use it. Finally, you need to decide on an editor. If you're using a Windows machine, Notepad is already built in. You can also consider using Notepad++ or Sublime. If you're using a Mac, TextEdit is the default editor, although many people also use Text Wrangler. I'll be using Sublime throughout the rest of the course, but for today, I will be showing you examples of how to edit in Notepad and TextEdit as well. So in order to get started, let's quickly review the 5 steps that we're going to do, a few of them repeatedly. You're going to start by opening your editor, and then you're going to save your file, add some content, save the file again, and open it in your browser. I want to walk you through a quick example, and I'm going to use Sublime to do it, but don't worry, I'm going to go ahead and show you some of the other ways to do it as well. So I've brought up my Sublime editor here, a nice black file. I'm going to start off by going to File and Save. And I'm going to name it just firstpage.html. Now, one of the things you need to decide right away is where you're going to save this. Hopefully you've decided on this before you even started working. I'm going to keep mine in a folder called Web Pages that I've put on my desktop. But you can pick anything here, or even if you want to, if you click off to the side here, you can create a brand new folder. What you don't want to do is save all of your code on your desktop. Let's go save. And now, while there are many times when I'm going to force you to sit through and watch me type horribly on the screen, this one, just to save some time, I'm going to go ahead and cheat and paste in some code that I've already written. As you can see, I have my doc type, the head section, and the body. In the head, I've included my encoding and my title, and in the body, we're just going to say hello. I went in and I saved it using Control-S. You can always do File Save, but I find Control-S is much quicker. And for every editor you use, there's these little helpful keys to help you know whether or not you've changed anything. So if you look right now at firstpage.html, which might be hard for you to see, if I were to go in and change anything, you actually get a little circle to let you know that, oh, you haven't saved in a while. All right, so I've gone ahead, I've created content, and now it's time for me to open my page. One way to do it is to head over here to my folder, and oh, here's firstpage.html. For me, there's a little icon of Chrome off to the side. For you, it might be a different browser. I'm going to go ahead and click on it and bring up my first page, and I have success. I cannot stress enough that most of the time when you type something at first, it's actually not going to work for you. For me, luckily, I have the power of editing. You have no idea that it actually took me a few attempts to get that file to work because I was messing around with some things. Throughout the entire course, I'm going to try to show you areas where you might have a problem. Hopefully you won't, but if you do, they're all very simple to fix. One of the most common problems is that when you right-click on the file, instead of opening up nicely in the browser, it opens up your editor instead. If you'd like to fix that, all you need to do is right-click on the file and select Open With. Another issue that happens quite a bit is that when you open up your file, instead of seeing a nicely formatted web page, instead you actually see all of your tags. When that happens, you need to check your file extension and make sure that it says .html and not something like .text or .rtf. Another issue that happens quite a bit is that you change your code, but your page looks exactly the same. There are 2 reasons that this tends to happen. One is that you have to do something called refresh your browser. This just means you upload the contents. The second thing that happens quite often is that you forgot to verify your file name. Let me show you an example of this one. So let's go back to our original file. As you can see, I have hello world written here. This is a very computer science-y type thing to say, and since I'm trying to seem more normal, I'm going to change this to hello everybody. I go in and I'm going to save my file. Done. Well, when I go back over to my web page, it still says hello world. It didn't change, and I'm kind of upset about that. So now I remember it's often necessary to refresh your page. There are a number of ways you can do that. You can typically go to the little circular area up here and click refresh. You can right-click and click on reload, or you can also go to view. You can also do it through the toolbar on top. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh right here, and you can see now I have the hello everybody. The other problem I mentioned is that sometimes people change their file name. So maybe you're not working on your first page anymore, so you decide, I'm going to save this as file, save as, second page. Save it. I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to refresh the file. Hello, everybody. Well, nothing happened. You are going to find this happening over and over and over again. When you're dealing with a lot of files all at the same time, you have to make sure that the one you're looking at on the browser matches the one that you've been typing. Because I changed the name of my file, I need to remember to change it up here in the URL bar as well. Boom. Another issue that comes up quite frequently is this idea that you get, we'll call, weird characters. One of the #1 reasons for this happening is my old favorite, copy and paste. Whenever I give you code and you're looking at it through PowerPoint, the problem is when you copy and paste it, a lot of the characters don't translate exactly the way you hope them to, and you get what we call weird characters. The #1 culprit is the quotes. So whenever you're typing and you have some sort of weird thing you're not expecting, go back in and try typing the code in by hand. So I've shown you how to create and edit a file in Sublime, but I want to make sure that everyone has a chance to see how I can create files using the editors that they have on their own computer. So I'm also going to show you an example in TextEdit and also in Notepad. I really hope when you watch these examples, you'll have your computer out and you'll type along with me. Go ahead and pause, stop things. Don't go ahead in the video until you feel confident that you're at the point that I've reached myself. Hi everyone, now we're going to go ahead and make a file with TextEdit. And if I wanted to be evil, I would go through and show you a very quick, simple example of making a file in TextEdit. But instead, I'm going to be very honest with you and admit that it just took me about 15 or 20 minutes to figure out how to make a really simple file in TextEdit. So first, let me show you what I did wrong. All right? I'm going to go ahead and paste in my code from my very simple page. In fact, let's get rid of this. There we go. We've just got our header and our content. So you can type this in as we go along, or you can wait. So it's time for me to save the file. And what I need to do is I need to make sure I'm saving it in the proper folder with a file name. So I'm going to go ahead and call this first page. And I'm going to go down here and I want to make sure that I save this as a web page. So one of the options is .html. So I'm going to click on this. I now have my first page.html. It's in the folder that I want, and I really feel like we should be good to go. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. Now, I'm going to go over here to my web pages folder, open it up, and it's going to open up in Chrome. So let's see how it goes. That is not what I was hoping for when we were first taping this segment. And it took me a really long time to figure out what was going on. The first thing I went to check, let me close this up, is I wanted to make sure that my file extension really had been .html. And it was. There wasn't a .text or a .rtf after it. The next thing I went in and checked is that all of my quotes were going the right way. So let's go ahead and put these in. Because if you remember, I'm always telling you that copy and paste can sometimes give you bad quotes. So we can go back again. Still no luck. If you're going to be using TextEdit, you actually need to go in and make some changes to the TextEdit program. It has nothing to do with what you're typing. It has to do with the TextEdit program. So I'm going to go ahead, copy this just in case I lose it, and clear it out. And I'm going to go up to TextEdit, select Preferences, and you can see that we have two options, New Documents and Open and Save. So one of the first things I'm going to say is, hey, whenever I have a new document, I would like it to be in plain text. Not RTF or rich text, but plain text. The second thing that you want to do is go over here to Opening. See the display HTML files as HTML code? We're going to go ahead and click on that. And then lastly, the most important thing is when you save your files, we want to save it as UTF-8. So I'm going to pause here for a second, just a second, while you look at your own TextEdit menu. You want to make sure that you have these boxes checked and you've changed it to Unicode UTF-8. Okay? If you've messed things up, go down to Restore All Defaults and try it again. I'm going to close this up. I'm going to go ahead and do new. Paste my code in. Ooh, that's very small for you, but that's okay. Do file, save, and let's call it firstpage2.html. Up. You can see right away it says, do you want to use the HTML extension or the .text? And I'm going to tell it, use HTML. Before I click this though, I want to point out that down here, it's showing that it's going to save as Unicode UTF.8. I can get rid of this warning if I want to by unclicking this if no extension use TXT. So we're going to use HTML. Let's go over here. Let's cross our fingers. Let's hope for the best. And now I have a successful page. So if you're going to be using TextEdit, there's really not much you need to do except for the very first time you set it up. Make sure you go into the preferences. From there, I can now go in, make changes. We did it. Save and refresh. So hopefully now you can successfully save and edit a file. Okay, so let's say that you are using a PC to create your files. What you want to do is you probably want to use Notepad at first, since it's the free version of the editor that's already on your machine. The first thing I did was I made a folder right on the desktop where I can keep my files. I know it's small, you probably can't see it, but it's called Web Pages. If you don't know how to make a folder, just so you know, you can right-click on the desktop, go to New, and create a folder. Once you've created the folder where you want to save your files, I'm right off the bat going to go ahead and say File, Save, and I'm going to name this firstpage.html. It's very, very important that you include the .html. If you don't include that, the computer's going to think you're just working on any other old type of file. So I'm going to go down here and change it from text documents to all files. Go ahead and save. Oops, it already exists, but I'm going to say OK. So now it's time for me to put in some content. I'm going to cheat a little bit here and just copy and paste in my content, even though you're going to have to type it in bit by bit. So again, I have my doc type, my HTML language equals English, meta char set equals UTF-8, my title, and my content. Just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead in here and put my quotes back in, because quotes always make me nervous when I do copy and paste, that maybe I've put in some sort of character that my editor isn't going to recognize. Now that I'm pretty happy and sure that I've got the things that I want in my file, I'm going to go ahead and save it again, go into my folder, and click on First Page. And there we go. So now, every time that you're going to change your file, you can just keep both windows open if you have the room, make your changes. I have a file. Save and reload. Nice job. You've made a file using Notepad. Okay, let's talk about writing clean code. And when I'm talking about clean code, I'm talking about learning how to write code that's going to work on as many devices as possible. And in order to do that, you need to know a little bit about the document object model, also called the DOM. When HTML5 was developed, the main kind of driving goal is that they wanted to stick by this standard, that any new features should be based on HTML, CSS, the DOM, and JavaScript. And you can have a chance to learn about each one of those. But I want to talk about the DOM for just a little bit because it's going to help you understand the HTML a little bit better. One of the things about geeky computer scientists like myself is that we love trees. Not like trees outside that are green and beautiful in the fall. We like mathematical trees. These tree-like structures that we can prove to be valid or invalid. Okay? So when we talk about HTML as a tree, we're talking about this idea that at the very root of the tree, we are going to be creating HTML. All right? And then, off here, and then from that tree, when we say, I'm going to make an HTML document, we want two parts. We want the head over here, and we want the body. In the head, we're going to keep all that kind of information that the user isn't going to see for the most part. The one difference is we might talk about the title, but we're going to have all that kind of hidden stuff nobody really cares about. In the body is where we're going to learn to put all of our HTML5 tags. So let's talk about HTML as a tree. All right? In this case, I'm showing you this idea that at the root of every HTML page should be what's called the HTML tag. That kind of thing that says, lets the browser know, I'm going to be giving you certain types of tags, and here's how I want them to work. If we don't look at it as a picture, I can also kind of just tell you that every tree has three parts to a well-formed document. The doc type, which is the version of HTML that you're going to be using. The head, which is all of the metadata, or kind of extra information. And the body. The body is the displayable content, the thing that most people are going to get back when they do the request response cycle. So let's talk doc type. You are so lucky. When I was creating web pages at first, and we were in HTML4, we had to come up with all these different ways to kind of explain whether our HTML4 was like very strict standards or whether it was transitional. In HTML5, it's very simple to say, nope, there's only one thing, and it's called doc type HTML, and you're all set. For the head, which is inside the head tag, we're going to have all this additional information used by the browser. So for instance, you might want to say what language you're creating your page in. You could also include, and you really want to include, what the title of your page is. And when I'm talking about the title, I'm not talking about big kind of header that you see. I'm talking about the little tiny thing you see in the tab of your browser. Later, you might want to add supporting files as well. You might want to have CSS files that will style your page, or JavaScript that can add on different interaction, or really any type of add-ons that's going to change the way people view and interact with your site. Other than the title, the metadata is not displayed. People will not see it. What people do see is the information that's in your body tag. That body tag is the bulk of your page. So it's very important to write well-formatted or tree-like code where you're making sure that every tag has an end, that you're not putting tags in weird orders. So most of the content in the body is displayed by the browser, but every once in a while there's a little bit of metadata in there too. But we're not going to hit that in this class. So let's look at an example. Right here, I have a file called template.html, and I'm displaying the code here on the screen for you. Can you find the three parts of a well-formed document? The first thing you want to look for is the doc type. We've got that right here, letting them know that this is an HTML5 document. We then have that HTML tag, which was the root of our really scientific tree, and I'm letting people know I'd like the language that it's displayed in to be English. In the head section, we've got that metadata, where it's telling us things like, hey, I know that there's lots of different keyboards and ways across the world to represent letters. I want you to use what's called UTF-8. Don't worry, just use it every time. And then the next part of my metadata is the title, where we want to see it saying my first page. That's it. That's two of the three parts. The last part is the body tag, and it's displaying, the content that we want to see on the screen. So let's look at this in a browser. What do I have? I have my title way up here and my displayable content right down there. Okay, I've written the code. The next step you should always do is validate the code. Say, okay, I've written code, it looks good, but I know that browsers, are very nice and they make things display nicely even when I haven't written good code. So if you go to validator.w3.org, you can check any website to see if the code is valid. And you have three choices. You can upload the URL, you can upload a file, Or you can actually copy and paste your code and put it right in there. In this case, I've put in the URL to template.html. Run check, and yay! Not surprisingly, because I knew I was going to be taping this, it successfully checked. Don't worry about warnings. Warnings are usually in to kind of cover themselves. What if you want to validate your file, but your files aren't actually on the internet yet? Let's walk through really quickly an example of how you can do that. Let's say that I have my file template.html and I want to check it. And I want to point out to you that I went in and I changed the file and I put in an intentional typo. I spelled the closing tag for title incorrectly. So let's see what happens and if the browser or the validator can find this. What I'm going to do is I went to validator.w3.org and I'm now going to select the third option, validate by direct input. I go back to my file, Command A or Control A if you're on a PC, Command C. I copied all the code and now I want to put it in the validator. Hit check. Up. And if we scroll down here, I can make this a lot bigger for you. You can see that I did get 2 errors. Uh-oh, why did I get 2 errors when I only typed 1 error in? Well, validators are never perfect, all right? So what error it found is it said, uh-oh, I found the end of a file and I was not expecting that. Well, the reason that happened is let's check out error number 2. It tells us, oh, you forgot to close the title tag. So sometimes one error can cause a lot of error messages. So don't worry. I've seen as many as 50 or 60 errors that once they corrected one line of code, it fixed more than 80% of those errors. So I'm going to go back over to my code. I'm going to fix it and put that title in, save it, copy it again, put it in, and I'm going to check again. And this time, checking complete, no errors. So just to review, you really want to follow DOM structure if you want a well-formed page. And following that structure means you always use beginning and end tags. Also, you close inner tags before outer ones. And what that means is if you start a title tag, you've got to end it before you end the body tag. All right? You also will want to use valid attributes, which is one of the things we're going to talk about a little later when we talk about images and basically parts of your page that need extra information. The problem with browsers is that they'll actually fix bad code for you. I always call them the helicopter parents of coding. It's like, oh, I know what you wanted it to look like, so that's the way I'm going to make it look on the screen. The problem is that doesn't always work for everyone. So just because your site looks good to you when you're looking at it on your browser doesn't mean it's right. You have to use a validator to check your code. This is it. Today is the day. I'm finally going to teach you enough HTML that you can start making an interesting page to share with your friends and family. It's also, unfortunately, probably, or at least hopefully, my first really big disappointment to you. And the reason is, I need to just break it to you right away that I can't teach you all of the HTML5 tags. I can't teach them all to you, and you don't want me to teach you all of the tags. It would be incredibly boring for me to list them all off to you. Instead, I'm going to get you started and point you in the direction of where you can find resources for more tags. Because it's really not until you need a tag that you ever really bother learning about it. Every tag has a beginning and an end. So right here, I'm using what's called an H1 tag or a heading tag to encase the words hello world. The first H1 is my start tag. It just shows the simple tag that I want inside brackets. The second tag, the closing tag, always starts with a slash. This indicates to the browser, oh, she's about to end a tag. This is one of the most common, is to have the start tag and the closing tag with some sort of text inside of it. My next tag, or the image tag, is what's called a self-closing tag. There's only one tag, and it contains both the beginning and the end. In this case, As soon as the browser sees the image tag, it knows that you're going to give it information that it can use to create a picture. And since there's no real text associated with the image, at least at this point, or any that you want to show on the screen, it's going to close itself. So while every tag has a beginning and the end, some do close differently. Also, some tags have what we call attributes. So the source, which is where the picture is located, and href, which is where the new page you want to go to is. So when we talk about the tags, for some of them, I'll also be talking about the attributes. Before we begin, I want to talk to you about one of the most important attributes of an element, and that's its display. The two most common display types are what are called block and inline. Block tags are ones that take up a certain amount of width and height. So anytime you have a tag that's called block, it's the same thing as if when you were typing, you hit new line at the end or enter a return. Inline tags are ones that only take up as much space as is needed. So I'm going to show you examples of both, but I really want you to understand some tags are block and some are inline. And it may not seem important now, but it's the kind of thing that's going to make it much easier for you when you're trying to make your pages look a certain way. So some of the most common tags include the ones I'm about to tell you about. Headings are block tags, and you have H1, H2, H3, all the way down to H6. These tags have what are called both syntax and semantics. To the browser, at first sight, it might simply mean, hey, everything that's in an H1 tag, I want to make it really big and bold. And things that are H6, I also want to make them slightly bigger and bolder, but not nearly as big as bold as the ones of the lower numbers. What a lot of people do is they just kind of randomly throw around H3 tags or H4 tags just because they like the look that the text takes on it. But these tags also have semantics, kind of a meaning that you don't see when you just look at it. And the semantics are things that are in an H1 tag have much higher importance than things that are in H5 or H6. And this is very important for people who are using screen readers. If you start throwing H3 tags and H2 tags all over the place just because you want them to be a little bit bigger and bolder, it's going to be very confusing. Another extremely common tag is the paragraph tag. It's also block, and inside of it, you can only contain other inline elements. So you can put a lot of text, a lot of pictures, and things like that. But you should never put a paragraph inside of a paragraph. Or even, you should never put a heading inside of a paragraph. Another common tag is the div tag. This is a generic section that tends to be larger than a paragraph, and it's related content that you would like to group together. Divs used to be the most popular tag. You would use a div for everything. The problem with divs is that there's really no semantic meaning behind a div. If you put a lot of them to your page, you're not giving your readers or users any extra information to let them know that this is a footer or a header or something along that line. Two additional tags that you'll find you use a lot are the list tags. If you put in the tag OL, that stands for an ordered list. By default, it's going to put each list item as 1, 2, 3, etc. You need to make sure that you end each of your list items before you start the next one. And you need to make sure that you've ended all your list items before you end your ordered list. The unordered list is very similar, only instead of using numbers, you'll use special symbols, perhaps the circle or the small square, depending upon your browser. Now, later when we talk about attributes, I'll mention that you can go ahead and change your ordered list, so instead of being regular numbers, you're using Roman numerals, or uppercase letters, or lowercase letters. But by default, these are just going to either be a 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., or some sort of little disk. Finally, one more tag that I know you're going to see a lot of is the line break tag. Line break is simply a BR, stands for line break, and this is a self-closing tag. Now, one of the things that's very important that I tell you is when you're typing your code, you can put as many line breaks in your code as you want. Enter, 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 enter. But the browser ignores all of it. The browser is not going to put something on a new line unless it runs out of space or it specifically sees the BR tag. So I mentioned before with the lists that tags can have attributes. Attributes provide additional information about an element. Sometimes they're absolutely necessary, sometimes they're just supplemental. The important thing to remember is that attributes are always specified in the start tag in the beginning. And attributes come in a name-value pair. So let's go ahead and look at a tag that needs attributes in order to work. I'm going to use the image tag as an example. Images are inline, which means you can actually put many images next to each other. And in order for an image tag to work, you pretty much need to tell the computer what picture it is you want it to show. So in this case, the source attribute indicates to the browser that the picture you want to show is called mypicture.jpg. Always notice that, again, it's a name-value pair. So the name of the attribute is source, and the value always goes in double quotes, and in this case is mypicture.jpg. Many people will just end right there, but I don't want you to do that. Images should also always include an alt attribute. Alt stands for alternative text, and this is what's going to show up to somebody who's using a screen reader, or even if the picture is missing for some reason because you misnamed your file. This will allow, if you have the little broken picture, some sort of text to show up to help people realize what it is you're trying to show. So in this case, I have one tag, which you can tell because of the bracket, and two attributes, source and alt. Now, speaking of images, there's a few things I want to mention to you. Images rarely work the first time you use them. They're either going to show a broken link because you wrote the wrong file name, or you forgot to upload it, or it's not in the right file, or the picture is going to be too big or too small or something like that. Unless you have the broken link and you're just worried about the appearance, I want you to just let it go for right now. What we care about right now is that you can get tags to work. We're going to worry about appearance later. So if you really have your heart set on making things look a certain way, then make sure that you open up the picture in some sort of editor and save it to exactly the size you want, and give it a really good name. It's very frustrating to work on your web page when all of your files are named image_02586. Here's an example for you of one image tag with multiple attributes. I have the image tag followed by source, logo.jpg. I have the alternative text, which is info for the screen readers and broken links. I include a title attribute, which will often display when you hover over the image. And then I also have a class attribute, which might indicate extra formatting, such as the height, the width, the position, etc. As you learn more and more tags, you're going to learn that they have specific attributes. It makes no sense for an image to also include some sort of href. It makes no sense for a link to include other attributes. But there are some that apply to many of the tags. So I just wanted to mention them to you quickly, and we'll come back to them later in the class. All right? The first is, well, the class attribute. What it does is it applies special properties to groups of elements. We'll use that later when we want to say, hey, we want to style all these pictures perhaps as thumbnails. IDs specify a very unique ID to just a single element on the page. And you're going to want to do this if you want to link back to it, if later you want to apply JavaScript to it. But ID says, hey, this is a special part of the page. You're not going to find anything else like it. Style is an attribute that used to be very widely used. Style lets you apply visual style. So you could put in special colors or spacing and things like that. The next one is called access key. And an access key is very important for accessibility. It allows a shortcut key to kind of activate or put into focus an element. So maybe you have a big page and you have a form or something along it, and you want someone to be able to quickly get to a certain part of your page. You can give them an access key. In the same way, some people may be accessing your page and only using the tab button to navigate through your page. If you do that, you're going to want to be careful about putting what's called a tab index. And it lets you actually specify which order people get to different elements in your page. So even though something may come later in the page, if you feel it's really important, you could put a high tab index and they can get there quickly. Okay, so one of the things I told you was that tags always start with a bracket, which is fine. That's very easy to figure out. And the browser knows whenever it sees a bracket, it shouldn't display the content. It should do something fancy. So what do you do if you want the browser to display a bracket and say, hey, this isn't a start tag? Well, then you're going to use special entities. So if you want a bracket, you would then use ampersand LT semicolon. The LT stands for less than. And please note that's an L, not a 1. You could also do ampersand GT for greater than. Ampersand copy. If you'd like extra blank spaces, you actually have to use a special entity. Putting space, 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 the browser ignores it. You'd have to actually put ampersand NBSP. Again, if you want the cent, all right, well, what if you actually want an ampersand? Well, in that case, we even have a special entity for that. which is ampersand amp. So we've gone through a number of tags today, and you're going to learn more and more tags and probably use cheat sheets and go online to find a bunch of different tags you want to use. So the important thing that I want you to know is, how do you know the difference between a tag and an attribute? And the key is to look for those brackets. Also, you're going to want to make sure that you know which two symbols end a self-closing tag. All right? Don't forget, that's where you have the / in the closing bracket. These are the kind of things that can really mess up your code when you try to validate it later. And so being cognizant of these ideas in the beginning will really help you write much cleaner code. Hi everybody! Today we're going to be talking about some of the newer HTML5 tags that I like to refer to as the semantic tags. This is going to continue our conversation about how we're trying to make our web pages the most accessible as possible to as many people. Before we begin talking about specific tags though, I want to talk to you about the design of your web page. Really, the most important step in your web design is the design. Once we have you down pat with the different tags and typing in files, we're going to change our focus to how you want to lay out your page. And you need a really clear picture of what you want to create before you can begin coding in earnest. So let's take a look at this sample page. Again, it's just a quick sketch, and it shows that I would like to have a header section, a footer section, and a few other sections embedded in between the two of them. Once I know that that's the kind of design I want, I can begin coding. So you may recall that one of the most common tags used to be the div tag. Because in the beginning, kind of dumb, you did everything with div. You would go through your page, group it together, and put each group into a div tag. These divs almost always had some sort of special class or ID associated with them. So for instance, one div might have the class of header, another the section, another the footer. This way, you could go back to your design and really break it up into a way that worked best for you. The first tag that I'll be talking to you about today is the header tag. The header tag is typically used to group together introductory or navigational aids. So you would put in your title, perhaps your navigation bar, anything that really lets the user know right off the bat what this page is about. The thing I want you to understand about the header tag is that it is a block tag and nothing more than that. There's no special formatting or anything along that line. However, it does let the user know that this is the header section. Now, most people will never see the tags. Remember, the browser looks at the tag and doesn't display it, instead formats its content. But for people who are using screen readers or other assistive devices, this is a great way for them to find what they're looking for if they're not using visual clues. Another point I want to make is that the header tag should not be confused with the head or different heading tags. This is going to happen to you a lot. Just remember that the head tag is for metadata and the header tag is more of just an aid. The next tag I'm going to talk to you about today is the nav tag. The nav is basically a section of your page that links to other pages or parts within your page. So inside your nav, you're not going to have links to Facebook or Google or your LinkedIn account or anything like that. Instead, it's really just links that go to other parts of your site. So for instance here, I've made an unordered list with 3 links. Each of them go to a different part of your page. There's a lot of debate, for better or for worse, as to whether or not your nav tag should be using lists. But the important thing is to include the nav tag to help people navigate through your page. Oftentimes, you'll find the nav tag embedded inside the header tag. Another tag is the footer tag, and this is a section that contains information that is pretty typical for the bottom of the page, such as copyright data, related documents, your links to social media. And while I said it's usually at the bottom of the page, this is not required, nor does using the footer tag actually make it that it'll show up at the bottom. So in this example here, I have my footer tag, my special entity to make the copyright symbol, and then my name with the line break. And then I've also included a link back to my main site. Some of our other semantic tags have a little bit more oomph to them. So for instance, one of the new tags is the figure tag, and it has a lot more semantics than the image tag we've gone over previously. every figure can include additional information. So you can include an image, you can include multimedia, you can include a combination of all of them. But it also has some additional tags, such as the fig caption. So what this is going to do is provides additional information for somebody who may not be able to see it. So the picture normally just floats by itself when it's in an image tag. This lets you say, this text goes specifically with this image. Now, again, we do have the alt tag, which helps describe the picture, but you have to remember, most of us will never see that. There are a number of other new tags in HTML5, and it's not really possible for me to go over all of them. Instead, you'll find that as you develop your pages and after you've done your initial web design, you'll logically just head toward these different tags. Some of them are structural elements, such as articles, summaries, sections, etc. Others you won't be using until we create forms. Another would be input types. Have you ever noticed that sometimes on your phone, when you click on certain buttons, different keyboards will pop up depending on whether you're typing in an email or a URL? These are all thanks to the new HTML5 email, date, color, etc. tags. We're also going to be able to talk about graphics elements such as canvas, and also media elements, which let you go ahead and put in your movies and music of your choice. The important thing to remember is that if you're developing your page and you find yourself using a lot of divs, you're going astray. You really want to use the best tag available that'll give the most meaning to the users. Semantic tags are going to help guide your users to the information in your page. And that's really what you want to do. You want to make your page the most accessible to as many people as possible. Hi everybody! Every once in a while I like to stop what we've been doing and just do a quick check and make sure that we've all been following along and really getting a grasp of what we're doing. So today we're going to make a template page. Today I want you to create a page called index.html. This page should utilize all those semantic tags that we've been talking about. The header, some sort of main, a footer. And what I want you to do is I want to make sure that those elements are not empty. Thirdly, I want to make sure that your page validates. So let's stop for a second and think about all the things we've learned. You've learned how to make elements. You learned how to validate them. You've learned how to save your code. So if you've only been listening and you haven't been coding, now's the time to jump in with me and start coding. So let's start with the shell. If you remember, every web page has three main parts. It has your doc type, which says, hey, browser, I'm going to use HTML5. It has your metadata, which says, I'm going to use this type of language, and this is what the title of my page should be. And finally, you're going to show your displayable content. So now's the time to stop. If you've been looking along your phone or whatever, I'd really love you to burst open an editor and start typing along with me. So I've brought up Sublime, which is the editor I like to use. And I'm going to go ahead and start typing in my text. The first thing I wanted to start with was my doc type, which for HTML5 is super easy because it's just doc type. So as long as I can type it correctly, I've got that. The next thing I said I wanted to put in was the head, or the metadata. And the tag for that, very simply enough, is head. Now, if you've been following along as I code, you would know that most of the time my code has this really nice kind of color signature to it, and you can follow along with the different parts. But right now, all my text is just white. The reason for this is that even though I've begun an HTML file, I haven't told my browser yet that it's an HTML file. It's just any type of text to them. So I'm going to go ahead and save. And what I want to do is I want to call this index.html. The reason for using index.html is that this is a convention known worldwide as this is the main page for my site. So I'm going to go ahead and hit save. And as you can see, the colors have started showing up. So let's go ahead and finish filling in my head element. I'm going to go ahead and put in my end tag right away because otherwise I tend to forget these things. And the two things I want in here are the metadata. Oops, meta. And the all-important title. The title, again, is what shows up on the browser's little tab. It doesn't show up on the page itself. It shows up in the tab. So, and I'm going to say, my first page. Okay, I've gone in and put the head, and now it's time to put in the body of my code, or my displayable content. So I'm going to start with the body tag. And I'm actually going to go ahead and end my HTML tag while I'm thinking about it at the same time. So this is an important step right here where we decide whether we're going to make accessible code or just everyday average code. Accessible code is broken into parts. You have your header, you have your main, you have your footer. So let's at the very least use a main and a footer here, letting our user know how you can distinguish between the two types of content. So when I put in main and I put in footer, it may look like I have content, but really I don't have anything yet. So I'm going to save my file, and I'm going to use open in browser, and just take a look at what we've done so far. And as you can see, I do have that little part along the top that says my first page, but what I'm missing is any type of real content. It knows there's a main and it knows there's a footer, but there's nothing else really there. So let's go ahead and put it in. So I will put in a little paragraph tag that says, this is my main code, and down, oops, I shall leave it just like that. And in my footer, I should put in some more information. Think of a more interesting footer. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save my page really quickly, and let's go ahead and take a look and see if there's any, oops, wrong button. And take a look and see if there's anything there. Oh, there we go. We have this is my main code and think of a more interesting footer. So it works. My code works and it's displaying the things I wanted it to display. But as I mentioned, one of the things we want to do every time we write code is we want to validate it and make sure we've written good, solid code. So let's take a look. I'm going to open up a new tab, do a validator, and I'm going to do validate by direct input because I haven't actually hosted my code anywhere. So go back to my Sublime. Grab all of my code and put it in here. I'm curious if you guys all noticed the error before I run it through the validator, but let's check. Well, at first you don't really see many messages, but as we scroll our way down, you can see that right away it says the element footer must not appear as a descendant of the footer. Well, that's a kind of weird error for me, but let's take a look at it. So we want to look somewhere along line 10. It also, I'm going to peek just a little bit at the next one where it says end tag for body scene, but they were unclosed elements. So now I know there are two things going on. There's something wrong with my footer and something hasn't been closed. Let's go to line 10. All right, here's my footer. Well, it's unhappy about my footer. Oh, here's a problem. I have footer here and footer here. So even though I had multiple errors, let's see what happens when I just make this one change right here. All right, I'm going to go back here. I kind of do this the long way, but I always prefer it that way. Put in my code. Let's check it again. Boom, even though I had a bunch of errors before, everything is gone. So I really hope you've been following along with me. I really hope you've gone in, you've written some code, you've remembered to use those semantic tags such as main, such as footer, and you went back in and you fixed any of the errors that the validator found for you. This is really important. You can't really know HTML5 until you jump in and start coding. So if you've just been following along with me, go ahead, make 2 files, 3 files, 4 files. Have some fun and really play with the tags that confused you the most, because that's how you're going to understand them and feel confident about your coding. Hi, today we're going to be talking about images. There are a lot of tags in HTML, and most of them are pretty self-explanatory, but the image tag is one where we really want to explore it to make sure that you're using it to the best possible purpose. So at this point, you've heard of a lot of different tags, but images is one where you really need to understand what the different attributes are. There are many different file types that are supported by HTML. The most common are JPEG, GIF, and PNG, and you're going to see those quite a bit. There's also SVG and bitmap. There are additional options. The most important thing is that no matter which file type you use, you need to include the different file extensions. That's the .jpeg, the .gif, the .png. The additional thing to understand is that when somebody looks at your page, every single image that you have on your page must be downloaded. So size can really be a factor. If you expect most of the people viewing your page to be looking at it from a mobile phone, you might want to think about using smaller file sizes, because every single image requires an HTTP request in order to be loaded onto the browser. So when we think about image sizes, most people think of just kind of the visual, how big it is on the screen. But in computer science, we talk much more about pixel sizes. By default, the browser is going to open up your image in the same exact size it's been saved. And it's really, really rare that this size was optimal. You probably have all gone to a site where you've gone to it and the picture was really small and you're not able to make it bigger. Or perhaps what I find even more annoying is when the picture takes up the entire screen and you're forced to scroll around trying to see the whole thing. So I'm going to show you two quick solutions for changing the image size. The first is to change the actual file, and the second is to use the width and height attributes for the image tag. Now, if you're going to use an editor to change your file, what you need to understand is that editors change those images permanently. This only works on what I call local files. You can only change pictures that you have down on your computer. If you're trying to use an image that you found someplace else on the web and you're linking to it, you can't change the size permanently. So if you're using a Mac, there's built-in software called Preview that you can use to change the size. And if you're using Windows, there's also a built-in program called Paint. Either one of those gives you the option to resize your pictures. However, just as a side note, neither one of these are the best choice if you really want to get into different image graphics. What most of us tend to do is use attributes. Now, one of the things I talk about and everyone talks about is the importance of keeping style and content separate. And I really try to encourage people to not put any type of style attributes into their code. However, the image tag tends to be an exception because it includes both a width and height attribute. So let's go ahead and walk through, and I'll show you a picture of the site when we're done. The first option would be just use the default image size. I have my image tag, and I have my two required attributes: source, where you can find the picture, and the alternate text. The next option would be to use the width in pixels. So in this case, I've added the attribute called width, and I've hard-coded it. That's what you call it when you give it a size that you want it to always be. And I've hard-coded it to 500 pixels. You might notice that I've only set the width, and I didn't set the height. That's okay. The browser will automatically figure out how much it should adjust the height so it stays proportional to the width. The next option is to use width and height. You do this if you want to make sure that your picture fits inside an exactly sized box. This is really nice for sizing, but it doesn't always look the way you expect it to look, and we'll see that in just a second. The last option, which may be your best option, is to use percentages. In this case, if you notice, I have width equals 50%. What this means is take how big the picture was going to be and reduce it by 50%. Now, as we get further on into programming in CSS, you'll understand that it's 50% of what it should be doesn't necessarily mean the original picture size. It depends on if you're inside a container. So here I've had each of the options: the default, the width and the height, and the percentage. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. So what you can see here are those 4 different options I had for displaying my image. Up in the top, I have my default image size. This just happened to be how big the picture was when I took it. One size down, and you can see this is where I've hard-coded the width of the image. I set the width to 500 pixels. My house still looks perfectly nice, and everything is proportional. The third option is the skewed image. This is where I hard-coded both the height and the width, and I didn't really put much thought into how they were going to act proportionally. So by doing this, you can see it's kind of squashed and not the best looking picture. This last one is the one I set proportionally, and you can see that it's about half the size of the browser window. What I want you to look at now is what happens when I resize the window. So as I go here, you can see that the first 3 pictures stay exactly the same size, but the bottom one will actually grow or shrink. And this is the same if I make it smaller and reload the page. So thinking about different things along this line is how you want your page to look when people might be looking on a large screen or on a mobile screen. It's something you want to think about. The last thing I want to point out to you that I'm going to talk about in just a second is this little tiny picture that unfortunately it's very hard to see, and there's not really a good way for me to blow it up. But I want to talk to you about adding images into the title bar. So if you want to put a favicon into the title of your web page, it's slightly different than using a regular image. Instead, this code must go into the head section of your code, not the body. What you do is you will actually go in and you'll include a link saying it's an icon type of link. We're using a PNG image, and then you put the link to the image itself. Just as a side note, you can't use JPEGs or GIFs for logos. It either needs to be a special icon image or a .png. Finally, let's go back to talking about alternative text, the attribute that you want to add to all of your images. What is the purpose of this, and why is it something we need? Well, what it does is it provides a textual alternative to non-text content. So anytime you have an image, you want to make sure that people who can't see the image can still understand the content behind it. So it might be read by screen readers. Sometimes it's displayed in place of images. So if your file breaks, you can still see a little note saying what they're supposed to be seeing. Finally, it also provides semantic meaning for search engines. So if you put really good alt text into your page, it's going to help search engines realize what the content of your page is. So how do we create good alt text? There are really 4 things you want to look for right off the bat. You want to be extremely accurate. We want to be succinct. We don't want to be redundant. And we don't want to include titles like picture of or graphic of. So the first one, be accurate. It's pretty self-explanatory. Only put things that specifically define the image that you're looking at. By be succinct, that means don't go on and on. Really, it's supposed to be a quick kind of idea of what the picture is about. When we talk about don't be redundant, what we're saying is don't include alt text that's already in the content of the page. If you have the image and in a paragraph underneath it, you describe it in detail, don't put that same content into the alt text. And finally, the one of don't include picture of, graphic of, that really goes back to just being succinct. It is occasionally okay to leave your alt text empty. So if you have images that are just decorative, logos, things along that line, you can go ahead and just put alt equals and then the double quotes. But it's very important that you don't skip the alt attribute altogether. The problem with going that route is you don't really let people know whether or not you were thinking about the accessibility. They don't know if the alt text is missing because it's non-informative or because you just forgot to put it in. Okay, so let's go ahead and review some of the things we know about images. 1, file extensions are incredibly important. You need to make sure they match the file format. The file name for your image is something that you're going to want to keep very short and descriptive so you can avoid using typos. And finally, the file paths, or that whole long thing you put in the source where you have images / picture / extension, you want to make sure that you're spelling those correctly as well. If you can do these 3 things, it'll make it much easier for you to successfully use images. And for right now, let's just go ahead and style the height and width in the HTML code itself. Even though I often talk about separating content from style, it's very common practice to go ahead and incorporate those 2 when you're doing images. In an earlier lesson, you learned how to include images into your web page. Sometimes, though, people aren't really sure where to find images or they're not very good artists themselves. So today, I want to talk about using Font Awesome. Font Awesome is a collection of icons that you can use for your page, and they're pretty much worldwide recognizable. Here I am at the Font Awesome page. I want to show you how to use it. First thing I'm going to do is go to the Icons selection. As you can see, there are thousands of different icons that you can choose from to help decorate your page. And it's very simple for you to use. The first step is that you need to tell your web page, hey, I want to use Font Awesome. In the Getting Started section of Font Awesome, they give you the code, so let me show you what it looks like. Here I am with a simple file. The only thing that's going to look new to you is that I have two unique ideas. The first is that I have a link in the head section of my page. Remember, the head is where we keep all that extra information that isn't always seen by the user. And what I've done here is I've connected to the Font Awesome CDN. It's a very intimidating acronym that just means Content Delivery Network. You're basically making an agreement where, hey, I'm going to link and use your stuff, but I'm going to use this special link so you know how many people are using it. If we travel down into the body section, that's when you're going to see a new tag, the I tag. It stands for icon. Do you remember the image tag? One of the things you need to have if you're going to use the image tag is the source, what picture it is you want to use. With Font Awesome, you have to include a class tag. And in that class tag, you're going to tell it which picture you want to use. So in this case, I'm using the one called FA Angry. Let's go ahead and see what this page looks like. Well, ta-da! We ended up with an angry little person staring at us. It actually is really straightforward. You get a very little icon each time you include this tag. Now, in all honesty, my screen is blown up really big, so if you were to run this code, the icon would be really small. So let me show you some of the options you can do to adjust the size of your icon. So what I've done is I've gone in and copied that line of code, I don't know, a couple times. And in each one, I added one extra attribute, and that's the size that I want the icon to be. So right here, I said, oh, make that icon extra small. And then I did medium and large. The 2x, 3x, 5x, 10x, etc., that's just making it that much bigger each time. So now, if I look at the page again, it's definitely going to look a little bit different. In fact, it's way too big for the screen, so let me make it a little bit smaller. And there you have it. We have the icons with different sizes. Angry face clearly isn't the only one you can do. Some of the more popular ones you might see include let's do the address card. So I'm going to copy. It always starts off as the I tag with the class equals. You need to have FAS for Font Awesome. And then instead of angry, let's go ahead and try an address card. And this one hopefully will look kind of familiar to you. I'm going to put a line break in just to mix things up a little bit there. Now when I refresh the page, you can see a very familiar little address card. Icons are great because they give your page this kind of really familiar look that people think it looks really professional. But there are some downsides to using icons if you're not careful. The most important being that they're not necessarily accessible by default. So if you were to turn a screen reader on this page, it would actually show up as if there's no content at all. Or even worse, sometimes people use icons for social media links. So let me show you one more example before we're done with Font Awesome. So what I've done here is instead of just using these icons as decoration, I've actually put them into my site so that if I wanted to say link to my Twitter account, right down here, I would include the Twitter icon. If I wanted to connect to Pinterest, I could use this Pinterest icon right there, and LinkedIn. And it actually looks really good. Let me show you. Here we go. I've got each of my links. Just so you know, the reason these icons are blue is, again, because they're links. And on each one, I could click on it, and it would take me to my account. Here's the problem. It looks great, but I'm going to run a quick wave validator check on it to see if my code is semantically correct. So I'm going to go to my hosted version. Pause. Is it here? Let me find it. I'll just do it right here. So I'm not using the code I was just using because in order to validate, I wanted to go ahead and put it on the server. So I'm going to go up and I'm going to click on my Wave validation tool. And Wave is going to go through and give me 3 errors. Not just any 3 errors, but 3 very important errors. And that is simply that, hey, you have 3 links and they don't actually have any text. Someone who's using a screen reader would have no idea where this link is supposed to go to. It doesn't know that this is Twitter or Pinterest or LinkedIn. But I have a really simple, quick fix for that. I'm going to use something called an ARIA label. Either in my A tag or actually in the icon tag as well. I simply put ARIA label equals, and in this case, I'm going to put Twitter. On the next one, I can add ARIA label equals Pinterest, etc. By adding in these ARIA labels, you're basically giving screen readers the ability to tell somebody where this link is going to go, to read a label. And this is huge in terms of accessibility. So I hope you have fun using Font Awesome. There are so many different ones you can choose from, but if you're going to play with some of these cool tricks, make sure that you're making them accessible to as many people as possible. Hi, today we're going to be talking about hyperlinks, or links as they're more commonly called, and how you can use them to link your document with others out there. Now, links are really what make the web a web. It's this whole idea that different links built together create this kind of knowledge that search engines, or you yourself, can gain by going from page to page to page with hopefully related material. So let's get right into how you create a link on your page. Links are called anchor links, and that's where we get the A for in the A tag. When you use an anchor tag, the A tag, you're going to need to make sure that you have 2 different parts. You need a hyper reference and you need content. So the hyper reference is just the reference to the location of the new content. So in this case, I used http www.umich.edu. That tells the browser, if somebody clicks on this link, this is where I want you to request the new page from. We also need to have content. The content is what we call the clickable part. In this case, it's text. I would actually click on an underlined text that says University of Michigan. But in some cases, it might be an image instead. So what types of links can we have? Some of the most common are called absolute links. We also have relative links, internal links, and graphical links. And I'm going to show you an example of each one of those. With an absolute reference in the href section, we need to put a fully formed URL. You need to have the HTTP or HTTPS, the address, and any type of extra document name you want. So if you remember, there's 3 parts to a URL. You have the protocol, the host, and the document. You need to include all of those if you have an absolute reference. All right? Everything else is still pretty much the same. For a relative reference, we slightly change what goes into the href. Instead of linking to some outside or even internal web page, we're only going to put, in this case, the file name. So in this case, we're going to link to page2.html. You might get slightly more in depth than that, where you can include also some sort of folder name. So in this case, we'd be going to the file called page2.html, but it's in a different folder called docs. The third way we can use a relative reference is to what we call use the ID tag. So when you have href equals ## or history, we're saying there is another location inside this same file and it's called history. All right. So absolute versus relative links. When would you use absolute links versus when would you use relative links? With absolute links, you're basically saying, I am not in charge of this page, somebody else is. So if you're linking to someone else's page, absolutely use the absolute link with the full reference in there. For relative is when you're developing your own site. And it's really helpful to use relative links instead of absolute. So that way, if you move your page to a different server or you move it into a different folder, you don't need to rename everything. And so those are some of the benefits to using local links, is just that idea that you don't need to update as much. Now, one of the things that you need to make sure that you never do is have a link that includes some sort of file structure, we'll call it. So check your links. Make sure that it never says C:page or my documents page or anything that is very specific to your computer. The reason that you don't want to do that is if you put your page out on the web, if you're done, you've put it up on a server or a hosting and you want other people to click, well, it doesn't make sense that they would be able to access pages that are on your computer. So never ever have a reference that includes something local to your machine. All right? One of the other things you can do is you can use images as the link. So the clickable component doesn't have to be text, and you've seen this a lot. It can be icons, images, different things along that line. In this case, I went in and I used the regular href, and what we're changing now is not the href, but the content that goes between the opening and closing tag. And I've gone ahead and I've put in an image instead. Make sure that you use the alt text to go along with that image. In another case, I've done something very similar. The only difference is instead of using a local reference right here for the image, I've used an absolute reference. I've put in the entire URL. So let's talk usability issues and accessibility issues. If you're going to use a clickable component, you want to make sure that it has an informative name. There's software out there that can list all of the links within a page for people who are looking for things who can't use typical means of accessing the page. And it is not at all helpful to them if all the links are labeled, click here, click here, click here, right? You want to give it some sort of informative name. You also want to make sure that if you're using an image for the clickable portion of your link, that that image needs to have some sort of alt text or other information available to those who can't see the image. So let me show you some coded examples of those types of links. All right. As you can see here, I have a reference to absolute references, relative references, images as links, and then some embedded links as well. So if I were to click on Washtenaw Dairy or Rosie's Coffee Bar and Bakery and Dexter's Bakery, etc., it would actually take me to their pages. Head back. One of the tricks I want to point out as I'm doing this is as I hover over each one of these links, if you look at the very, very bottom of my browser, and I can't really show it at the same time, as you highlight it, it shows you which URL you are going to. And I think this is very valuable for people to know, because if you're ever hovering over a link and the information you see at the bottom of the page doesn't match what you expect, I wouldn't click on it. So absolute references take you away from your site. Relative references can take you to something that's but within your folder. So right here, I have an image of some donuts, and I've gone on and they're in my folder in my file. So I was able to link to them just using the picture name. All right. We can also use images as links as well. Instead of writing donuts from the Squire shop, I went ahead and made it so you can click on the image to get to the larger view. This last idea of embedded links is a little bit interesting. So let me bring you over to the code for just a second and show you right down here, I have something called relative references with an ID equals relative. I have embedded links with an ID that says embedded. And up here, at the very beginning, you can see I have div ID equals absolute. With embedded links, I can click on any of these and navigate within the same page. So I'm not going to go to a different page. I'm not going to open up a new tab. Instead, I'm going to jump to different places within the page. So I went to absolute. I went to relative. Now, if I try to do embedded references, it doesn't look like it moved, but it really did. It's just that we're already there. All right. So that is how these kind of embedded or internal links work. All right. Now, if at any time you get confused about how code is working, I just want to remind you that you can always go to View, Developer, and View Source to really get a better idea of how people are creating their pages and their links. Next, let's talk about targets. All right. Anchors can take a different target attribute as well. We've got the source. Let's add anchor. Or target. So you might have target equals self. This is kind of the default action. This is going to happen if you don't put anything at all, if you don't even include target. And what it means is when you click on a link, open up in the same tab or window that you're looking at right now. If you put target equals blank, you're going to leave the current page that you're in exactly the same and open up a new tab or window for where you want the new page to be open. Now, this has its upside and downside. The upside is that your site is still open in someone's window. The downside is that many people don't like it when it keeps adding on, and as they progress through your page, you're making them open more and more tabs. There are two other options that we're not going to really talk about here, but you can see them in the reading, and those are top and parent, and that deals if you're really getting into the idea of having multiple windows, frames, etc. open. So let's go ahead and review, because making sure that you understand links is vitally important to your success in this course, or even in just understanding HTML. So the first thing to know is a page without links is extremely rare, and to be honest, it's almost not even a web page, it's just a document. Links can be absolute, relative, and internal. And internal, again, was the kind where it had the hash mark in it. I think I may have referred to them as relative, but I want to make sure I'm clear that the hash mark makes it internal. You want to use caution when using images in links. It's not that they're not a great thing to do, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying make sure that you do it carefully to ensure that everyone who's viewing your page can get the same content and the same experience as everyone else. Hi, in this lecture we're going to talk about multimedia. This is including video and audio into your website. Now, video and audio are two of the most popular and two most hated elements of the web. The designers love it because they get to put their cool videos and perhaps some homemade music online and share with everyone. People accessing your site sometimes hate it because they feel like they don't have any control over what they're seeing. So what we're going to talk about today is the HTML5 audio and video elements. We're going to briefly explain the purpose of plugins, and then finally, we're going to reflect on the accessibility issues that come hand in hand with using these types of multimedia tags. So before HTML5, there weren't really any consistent uses of multimedia that were being held across all the browsers. So the new HTML5 is designed to kind of avoid the use of having to use plugins or extra software that you don't already have on your machine. It should really be plug and play. If you're going to put in a video, people should just be able to see it without having to download QuickTime or Flash or anything along that line. Now, it's not a fully implemented tag yet, but it's moving very quickly in that direction. So let's start with the video element. So the video tag uses a source attribute, very similar to the image attribute. You tell the browser where the file is. You can also use what we call embedded source tags, where you might have the video tag and then multiple sources down below. There are a number of attributes that are used very widely. The first two, height and width, are pretty self-explanatory. How big would you like your video to appear in the browser? Autoplay dictates whether or not the video should start as soon as you load the page. Loop will allow the video to play over and over. And the last one, controls, is something you can add to give the person more control over when to stop and start the video. If you use the video tag, it's usually a really good idea to put some text in there along with the different attributes. That way, if the browser for some reason does not support the tag or can't play the video, you get a kind of helpful hint to the user, letting them know there should be a video here that you would be looking at. The audio element is very similar to the video, and then again we use a source attribute to link to the file. Typically, you're going to use an MP3 or WAV file. The attributes, again, very similar. You have autoplay, controls, and loop. But we also have buffered, muted, and volume. And these are extra attributes you can put in where you're going to control what the person's listening to and how loud. Also, when you're using audio, you can set clips where you can go in and say, I want the video to start at this particular time. So my first example, I wanted to only play the music from 5 to 25 seconds. The next one, you start at the beginning and you only are going to play the first 39 seconds. Again, you can go on and on. I want to start at 1 minute 38 seconds and just go ahead and play to 45. Or in the end, you can just say, hey, start at the 42 second and play from there. So showing you the code for HTML video and audio is pretty much the antithesis of what it's all about. It's supposed to be about looking at things and hearing things. So let's go ahead and look at some code now that's actually working. You can see that I have the source is just my boxcar movie, and I've set the default width to 40. So I'm going to go over here to Sublime and open this up in the browser. There it is, and it's not very exciting. Unless you have super quick eyes and your browser is incredibly fast, you completely miss the fact that it loaded this video and played all the way through. So let's go ahead and try this again, or actually just loaded it and didn't do anything. Let's add autoplay. All right, save it. I'm going to go over here and reload. And now you can see By adding the autoplay attribute, it'll automatically show the video. Now, this is something you don't want to do unless you're very certain that the viewer wants to see it. There was a big uproar recently when a social media site started making all the videos autoplay. So if you went on, all of a sudden these videos were playing and it was eating up a huge amount of bandwidth for people. All right? So instead of just doing autoplay, let's go ahead and put in controls. By doing this, you can see we've now added a little control panel to the bottom of the video. People can now start the video, stop the video, and rewind it. This is really the way you kind of want to think about how you can enhance the experience for the user. It is possible to put multiple attributes. And do this. And kind of put them on top of each other. If we do this now, you get to experience my 5-year-old flying down the road multiple times over and over again. Again, you would really want to avoid using loop and also avoid using autoplay unless you're giving people the opportunity to use the controls as well. Okay. One last thing I want to talk about right here is you might notice with controls and loop, these are attributes that don't appear to be taking any values. So source equals, width equals. When you put in these Boolean attributes, it's the same thing as saying controls equals true, loop equals true. So that's how we went through with our video. Let's go ahead and look at the audio for a second. Make this a little bit bigger here. What I have here is I just have a link to the same song 2 times. In my first version, you can see that I'm given the little audio bar because I made sure to use controls. And if I play, it's going to go ahead and play through the whole song. However, in my second option, you can see I've added right here the T equals 1535. I've set it up for you so that you'll really get to hear the song during when the exciting part really kicks in. So these are just some simple examples of how you use the tags to show your video audio. And I really hope that as you're coding, you're making sure to type things along and mess with things and play with things to really get a feel of how these videos and all the different HTML5 tags are working. So one of the things I talk to people about who have been coding in other versions of HTML and don't really want to make the change over to HTML5, that there are so many reasons that you want to make this quick, simple switch. And plugins are an excellent example. Since before HTML5 there was no standard, plugins were required. So what we want to do is go ahead and even if it's not supported at the moment, go ahead and use this tag, understanding that some browsers may still require Flash in order to play them. Finally, let's talk about accessibility issues. When you're going to use video or audio, just like with any type of non-contextual content, you want to make sure that you provide any type of text descriptions and closed captioning or other equivalent content. You want to make sure that you also provide any links to plugins, otherwise you're pretty much just left with some sort of blank little broken icon that people don't always understand. And finally, the most important thing I'd like you to take away from this talk, beyond being able to use the code, is that multimedia should really enhance your content. You don't want it to be a distraction. You don't want people spending time trying to figure out how to turn it off so they can, in order to really get to the content of your page. Thanks. Hi, today we're going to talk about tables and how you can use them to display your data on your website. So, how I like to put it is that we really used to consider tables as being this evil kind of idea because people weren't using tables for the reason they were supposed to. Instead, they were using tables to kind of set things out, laying them out nicely on the screen. This started to happen back during the time of HTML2, maybe HTML 3.1, and people said, I really want my page to look nice, and I don't have a means to do it, so I'm going to make it a huge table and kind of lay everything out in different rows or columns. This completely throws out the whole idea of separation of content from layout. In addition, it makes it really confusing for people who might be using assistive devices because they're wondering, is this really all a bunch of data, or is there content that should just be kind of formatted in the regular way? So we're going to start talking about tables, and what I really want to do is stress the idea that you should only be using tables if you have some sort of data being displayed. Now, before you even start coding a single thing, I need you to sketch out your layout of what your table should look like. Now, I've told my students this over and over again, and they say yes, yes, and then they start to code, and then they say yes, yes, and then they start to code. And after about the 4th or 5th time, they realize, oh, it's a lot easier to write clean code the first time than to fix broken code. And so then they begin and they think, all right, how many rows and columns do I actually need to represent all of my data? And then you go a step further and say, well, are there any rows or columns where I actually need to span multiple cells, or what we call the little boxes of the table? Because if so, it's going to be a lot easier if I've drawn this out to figure out where I'm going to need in special attributes to make that happen. Because one of the most important things to know when you're doing tables is that the browser is expecting there to be the same number of cells on every single row. If you don't do that, it's going to look very messy. Once you've decided what your table should look like, then it's time to start thinking about the tags. You start off with the table tag, and it's basically just a container element that's going to hold all the other attributes or all the other tags inside of it. You're going to have the table row, and then here for TD, I have columns, but what I really think would be best is to think of this as table cells, not really columns, because what you're doing is you're talking about each individual box. So inside the table, you're going to have one or more table rows, and then inside each table row, you're going to have one or more TD elements, so the columns or the cells. So here's the code for creating a very simple table. Although it looks very convoluted and like there's a lot of things going on here, most of this is just information for the browser. When we look at the actual page that's generated, you'll see that it's very clean and simple. So I have my code for my table on the outside, and then each one of my lines of code here is one row. I have my tr start and my tr end. And then inside each row, I have three elements, 1, 2, 3, which are inside the TD tag. And I'm going to tell you right now that when I initially wrote this code, it looked fine, but I'd kind of messed it up because I had forgotten to put in my ending tags. So make sure when you're coding these that you're being very clean and very concise. And if you do it correctly, this will create a simple table, as I said, with 9 elements in it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is as simple as you can get as far as a table goes. Now, in some cases, you might want to add what we call table headings to your code. Table headings is the idea that at the top of each column, or even at the top or the start of each row, you have some sort of text that's bold that indicates this isn't data, this is actually the name of the data that we're looking at. Now, it's fine, I mean, it's not fine. What some people would do is they would just make these regular TD elements and then perhaps make them bold. So the people who are looking at it can say, oh, hey, look, this is bold, so it must be more important. But we really want to avoid doing that. Instead of using a TD with some sort of bold font, we want to use the semantic tag TH, which stands for table heading. So here, these 3 lines of code are exactly the same as before, but I've added one new row where instead of TD, I have TH. So I have row 1, row 2, row 3, etc. And what you can see here is that what we get is this nice little table heading at the top of each one that is both visually lets the user know that these are headings, but also semantically conveys that same information. So one of the things I mentioned earlier when you're designing your table is you want to decide if you're going to be spanning multiple cells. It might be the case that the table you want to make isn't some sort of perfect tic-tac-toe grid or perfect 9 by 9. So you can combine multiple rows and or multiple columns using the row span and column span attributes. Inside your element, you would include row span equals 2 if you wanted to span 2 rows, or column span equals 5 if you wanted to have it span 5 columns. All right, so let me go ahead and show you an example with some code. And again, I realize, especially if you're looking at this on some tiny little screen, that this seems really like a lot of information to digest in. But it's not really that much going on. I have a simple table where I have my table headings with the child's name and then the parent's name. And then I go ahead and I start putting in a child, and with each child I include their parents. So here I have row span equals 2 for Catherine, which means I actually want my Catherine cell to take up 2 lines. Same with the Edward cell. Maggie I've left completely alone. So let's go ahead and just look at the end result, and I think that's really, if we backward chain, is going to help you understand what this code is doing. So again, I have the child's name, the parent's name, and here are the 2 cells where I did the row span, and you can see it actually took up multiple rows because in this case Catherine and Edward both had 2 parents that we wanted to put it together with. Again, not a hard concept, but it is the case that if you weren't thinking about it and we went back to your code and just started throwing row span and column span in, it just gets very messy and harder to debug. One of the things you might have noticed, at the very top of the table, I included a border attribute. The reason I did that is because I think it's much easier to see this row span here because I have the lines around each cell. So you can use the border attribute to go ahead and put lines in between each one of your cells. And it's very common to do that. But again, in your HTML, I try to avoid styling. It's something we can add later if you decide to learn more about CSS. But it's an attribute that's so commonly used, I wanted to go ahead and put it in there so you could see what was going on. Next, let's talk about captions. So how do we link text to a specific table? What people used to do is they would put in some sort of heading, H2 or H3, and they would put it right above or right below the table. So visually, if you were looking at it, you could kind of figure out, oh, this goes with the table. But again, I really want to push you to use semantic tags. So instead of doing that, you can go ahead and use the caption tag inside the table, and it'll help everyone know that, oh, this caption goes with this specific table. So let's go ahead and review. Number one, tables should only be used for tabular data. Don't use it for layout. 2, draw your table before you code your table. It's going to save you so much heartache in the end. I promise you that. Finally, and this is the third and most important thing I hope you leave with, is that you need to check for unclosed tags. One of the things that's great about browsers when you're kind of developing locally, you're typing your code and you're testing it and looking at it, is that your browser can usually figure out what you meant to do, even if you messed up. All right? And tables are a good example where you can forget to close some tags, but your browser kind of knows what you meant to do. But later, if you decide to make a table and you're going to upload it, and you really need to make sure that the data in there is valid and represented well, one of the worst things you can do is leave your tags unclosed. So make sure you validate your code whenever you write a table, or really whenever you write any code, and you'll really be able to be sure that you're writing the best code that you can. Hi, today we're going to talk about some of the tags that you may find extremely useful as you go and try to add blocks of code and simple snippets of different things to your web page. I know that it can seem overwhelming how many tags there are in HTML5, so today I'm going to try to break down some of the most useful ones. Now, I realize it may seem overwhelming as I start throwing all these elements at you. You're not supposed to memorize them all by the end of this lecture. Instead, I'm really just trying to give you a taste for what's out there so you can start playing with your own code. So one of the first things you need to decide when you're coding is which tags are you going to use? There are the generic kind of what we call block tags, paragraph and div, that break your code into nice sections. Paragraph is kind of self-explanatory, and div gives you a way to put groups of content together. But the problem with both div and paragraph is that they're very generic. So we want to move over to the idea of using these semantic tags, such as header and nav, footer, and figure. And we talked about those in an earlier video. Some of the other block tags that you may not be familiar with are listed here. The first one are the containers. Containers are simple things where you can put like-minded code together. So you might have an article or an aside, a section, main. Again, they almost seem generic in their names, but as you grow more comfortable, as you're designing your website, you can start to see like, oh, this isn't a generic section, this really is an aside. The next block tag is HR, or horizontal rule. And it's really an interesting idea because it doesn't contain any text at all. Just to remind you, block tags are tags that have the display block. It means it forces a new line above and below. There's never going to be anything next to it by default. So our hard rule will just put a single line across your page. Simple, yet very, very much used by many people. The next one is address. This will go ahead and be a block tag, and it doesn't format your address any differently than other text, but what it does is it allows screen readers and other assistive devices to quickly and easily find if they're looking for your address. Block quote would be another block tag, as well as details. Now, the details tag is very interesting, and it's kind of cool if you can get it to work. And what it does is it allows you to kind of have this drop-down open and close idea with your text. Now, just to warn you, it is not implemented in Firefox, so if someone with Firefox tries to run it, it's just going to kind of default to this open idea. All right, so there's HR, address, block quote, and details. I've told you what they were. My guess is you still have no idea what they really do, so let's take a look at a quick example. So here would be an example of the HR element. It's just a simple line across the screen, nothing too fancy, but very recognizable. The next one, the address element, in this case, the browser does italicize what's inside the contents. I had to put my own end line here, but otherwise it just looks kind of italicized. But you can't be sure that it'll be italicized on every browser. It's really specific to Chrome, Firefox, Safari, etc. But the important thing to know is that there's semantic meaning here. Here we have a block quote. And what block quote does is it indents the code and kind of lets people know that there's a quote that you're looking at. One of the things I put inside my block quote was I put in a cite tag so that someone can know right away that I've cited Napoleon Hill. So if someone's doing a search for Napoleon Hill, this is going to up the chances that a search engine will link back to your page. The last one, details, is kind of combined with a summary tag. So I'm going to go ahead and click here, and you can see that it opens and closes. So the default is to have it closed and then open up when someone clicks on the little arrow icon right here. Now, one of the things I mentioned is that it's not supported on Firefox. So if you're looking at this page on Firefox, by default, you're just going to see it in the open context. So let's go ahead and go back to some other tags that aren't block tags. We're going to do some inline tags. Again, remember, inline tags just means that you can put it into the page and go all in a line, one after the other. You don't need to break things up. So span was the original inline tag for plain text. You would put span around some code, and then you could go ahead and style it any way you wanted to. Now, in addition, we have cite, abbreviation, time, code, and then the subscript and the superscript. Now, if you're watching closely, you may have noticed that I left a little typo after abbreviation there, so make sure you go ahead and put in the less than or greater sign. But let's look at examples of this code as well. Here I have my inline elements. The cite basically makes it easier for people or bots to search your code. So I went ahead and put this code right inside a cite tag. Now again, this particular browser happened to style it differently, but that's not always going to be the case. Another new tag that has come along recently is the abbreviation tag. So if you notice, right along here, I've included abbreviation inside the box. Now if you can, watch what happens when I put my mouse over the Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. As I hover over it, it's very small probably on your screen, but you can see that the expanded version of the abbreviation pops up. So I have Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. Now, from an accessibility screen point, it can actually go ahead and read the expanded version. But even for people who aren't using screen readers, I actually find that you need to do something to let people know that hovering over is even an option. Most people wouldn't think about that. The time attribute is another one that is just inline, and most of us won't even know it's there, but it allows you to give extra semantic meaning. So the party starts at 9 p.m. makes perfect sense to us, but the party took place on New Year's Eve. Notice again, that's actually a time. Even though it's not our typical numeric time, it is a time. By putting in different time tags, it's also much more likely that if someone's accessing your site on a mobile phone, it'll pop up as knowing that it's a date. Sometimes you would like to be able to identify parts of your code as code fragments. This happens to me all the time because, I'm a computer scientist. So the code elements tend to be displayed in different font, but it's not always the case. But code is just a nice way to break it up and let people know, what is this crazy stuff people are typing? Oh, it's code. It's not supposed to make sense. Finally, the last two are subscript and superscript. And these are used to create, a lot of times, mathematical formulas. So you can see here, I've raised up the 3 and I've lowered down the 2. So I've given you kind of the general block tags, the general inline tags that people use. And there's other tags that people use quite often that you may see when you're looking at their pages. The issue with these tags is that they, when I say need more, it's really weird to use these tags unless you're also incorporating them with JavaScript or some other elements that you probably don't know a lot with yet. So these include the button, the meter, progress, iframe, BDO, which stands for bidirectional orientation, and then the map attribute along with area. Now, people really like these, but they tend to need JavaScript. So I'm going to show you a quick example, but I'm not going to include the fancy add-ons you would need to use them because that's not what this course is about. Right now, we're just learning these tags. So let's take a look at them so you can see what they look like visually and understand that they're not actually functioning yet. So my special tags that need more, I've called it. I'm a little worried that you might not even be able to see it because it's so light in screen, but you can see I've included some open and close buttons. They don't do anything, but they look really nice. So go ahead and put them in if you want, but it may confuse people that they're not actually operationable. The next one is meter, and you've probably seen this before. Basically how this one works, let me actually bring up the code for this one. window. You can see for the meter one, I've actually gone in here and put in meter, minimum value of 0, maximum value of 100, and my current value is 50. So you can see it's colored in until about pretty much halfway through. All right. Same here with the next one. I've set it to 25%. Here, I just wanted to show you that it doesn't always have to be 0 to 100. You can start at 5 and go to 10, and I've set it to 8, which is 60%. So that's kind of how the meter works. Progress is very similar to meter in that it shows kind of a proportional value. Now, with progress, you're expecting that you're doing something where eventually you'll get to 100. So you've taken surveys before where as you filled in, the progress bar fills in. Again, both meter and progress tend to use JavaScript to update them. The next one I was going to show you is iframe. Iframe is used to nest content within each other. It is not equally well supported by all the browsers, so you'd really want to explore who can use it and the best way to use it. And you would definitely want to look into options such as height and width. So right here in my iframe, I've said, hey, let's go ahead and link back to my page. And it puts my whole web page inside this little block of the page. Down here, I went ahead and said, hey, let's do that iframe again, but this time, let's go ahead and have it take up a much bigger width, all right? Now, one thing you can notice is I can still click in here. I can do all the things. It's as if I have a web page inside of a web page. The last one, oops, let's go down here. I want to show you is the bidirectional orientation. And this one would be something you would use if your particular language tends to not just go from left to right and instead goes right to left. So bidirectional orientation takes either RTL, which stands for right to left, or LTR, which stands for left to right, and you can go ahead and put in the text. So here is my going from left to right, and here's the same thing going right to left. I didn't really give examples of the map with the area because, again, this is one where you would really need to understand JavaScript to really embrace what it's doing. So I realize I went over a lot of tags that you just right now, and some of the code you probably understood and some of it you didn't. But all the code is online, so you can go ahead, you can download it, you can play with it, you can change it, all right? But as you code, you're not supposed to go in and be like, oh, I'm going to try to use every possible tag I can to show how much I know about HTML. No. Use the most specific tag possible. Whenever you're not sure, go ahead and ask somebody else. Say, what would happen if I were trying to look at this page with my eyes closed? Would I understand what's going on? The second thing you need to understand is that sometimes your tags just don't work. Now, there are two reasons that your tags may or may not work. The first one might just be you have a syntax error. So make sure you run your code through a validator, and that will help you find places where you haven't closed tags. This is especially important if you nest tags, meaning you put one inside the other. The other thing you really want to do is you want to run your code in multiple browsers. So even if your page looks great when you're running it in Chrome, make sure you check it out on Firefox. If it looks great on Safari, make sure you check it on Chrome. It's really important that you make sure that your pages can be reachable to the greatest number of people possible. And really the only way you can do this is by keeping your code simple, succinct, and you're always validating. Thanks. One of the things that I'm constantly talking about in my courses is accessibility. The thing is that I've come to realize is that I can talk about this as much as I want, but it's really up to me to show to you why it's so important for you to make the web as accessible as possible for others. So today we're going to talk about three things. First, I would like to explain what a web accessibility professional does. Second, we're going to talk in depth about how disabilities relate to the web. Finally, I'm going to introduce for the first time the 4 principles of accessible interface design. These 4 principles are something that will hopefully guide you throughout the entire time you're making web pages. So let's start off with this whole idea of what a web accessibility coordinator does. One of my pet peeves is people who say they don't want to go into technology because they'd rather do something where they can help people. Well, my follow-through to that is that if you really want to help people, you need to understand technology. So one of the things that people like to do is find careers where they can help people who have issues and work together with people who are in technology. And that's exactly the type of thing a web accessibility coordinator will do. So first, one thing they might do is help guide policy and purchasing decisions on what kind of software is most accessible to the widest range of people. Second, they can evaluate web interfaces for accessibility. So by learning just some key tips and tricks, they can go to different pages and find out where there might be pitfalls for people. Third, they can assist people with disabilities to access online infrastructure. Most universities and large companies will always have someone whose job it is to assist those who need some help accessing online material, or really any type of technological tools. Fourth, it's very important that people keep pace with changing technology. You will always have a job if you can find a way to combine your love with helping people with the different tools that are being used. So let's talk specifics. According to the 2012 U.S. Census, 1 in 5 people in the U.S. have a disability. That means that there are 60 million people in the U.S. who are dealing with issues that other people may not have, and half of them are impeded from using the internet. So we will talk briefly about 4 issues that tend to pop up the most when dealing with disabilities and the internet: visual issues, hearing, motor, and cognitive. When you talk about accessibility, almost everyone thinks about screen readers. They design and say, oh, I'm going to make sure that my page will read well on a screen reader. However, it's much, much more than that. While 1.8 million people are completely blind, we also have 8 million people who have difficulty reading ordinary newsprint, even with their glasses on. So one of the things that we want to think about when we're designing is more than just font size. We also need to think about color contrast, your different font style. Can someone really see your page as easily as possible? We're also going to want to think about hearing disabilities, and we're talking both from partial to total deafness. So 8 million people have difficulty hearing a normal conversation, and 1 million are completely deaf. More and more places are moving to online presence, and of course we all know that watching videos online is a very common thing. We're all doing it right now. So one of the things to think about if you decide to add videos to your site is, did you include closed captioning to really make sure as many people as possible can access your content? But there's also other things to think about. Are you blaring music? You might have users who don't even realize that music is playing. Or perhaps you have things so low that people can't quite grasp what you're saying. One of the things we're going to talk about is making sure that people have the ability to control the different multimedia that you're going to put in your page. This is going to help people with hearing disabilities feel that they are in command of the technology, not that the technology is in command of them. One of my own personal issues is that of motor disabilities. There are many, many people who are unable to use a mouse or a physical keyboard. Maybe they have slow response time or just limited fine motor skills. So dexterity issues are something that affects 8 million people who have difficulty using their arms or hands. But my guess is that for most of us, have had some issue with trying to use the web and not being quite able to do what we hope to do. So one issue that we talk about is what happens when someone tries to tab through your page. This is a very common way for people to get through pages, but unless you're very careful, you can make it that people tab through to nowhere. Another issue is, do you require a steady hand? Many people like to add flashy and cool graphics and animations to their page, but I know that I personally have been frustrated at trying to click a button while the button keeps moving around the screen. Another issue is cognitive disabilities. And when we talk about cognitive disabilities, there's a very wide range of issues we might be talking about. There's learning disabilities, distractibility, dyslexia, even the ability to remember or focus on large amounts of information. So one of the things I was laughing at when I looked at this slide just now is that this slide perhaps has too much text on it for people to really be able to focus on what I'm looking at. So we're talking that there are 16 million adults with ADD or ADHD. Another overlooked population is that there are a large number of soldiers, Marines, and National Guard members who have different psychological conditions such as traumatic brain injury or post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, what does that have to do with making your web accessible? We want to make sure that things are easy to understand, not flashing, not requiring great amounts of concentration. Cognitive disabilities number greater than physical and perceptual disabilities combined, so it's something that you want to think about when you're designing your page, or even if you're just helping other people design theirs. So let's get to specific stats, because nothing helps me convince people more that they want to design for the web than showing them the numbers. So almost 10% of the US population has 2 or more disabilities. 40,000 people in the US are both deaf and blind. So think about trying to access technology when you have those types of issues. 41% of adults 65 and older have a disability. And there are almost 9 million people with disabilities who are poor. 70% of the disabled are underemployed or unemployed. The issue is not that they are not able to do the jobs that are out there. Many times there are roadblocks put up there that they can't get through in order to do jobs that they are very well qualified for. So the web offers unprecedented opportunities for the disabled. Here we are right now, all taking a class online. So education has the benefit in that we teachers can reach as many people as we can. And for students, it means that you have access to resources that you never had before. Many people get their news from online resources, so we want to make sure that we make it as available to everybody. Commerce I find particularly interesting because many places have online presences, but are they even realizing that they're alienating such a large customer base? And of course, the social benefits of the web are easy to see. So many people have created more friends online than they actually have in real life. So the benefits of the web are amplified for the disabled. People who before could not access education, news, commerce, or social interaction are now able to do that. So the web is an enabling technology, and we want to make sure that we continue to make it so. So hopefully I've convinced you just from a human standpoint that it's important to make your web pages accessible. But there are, of course, legal aspects as well. The Department of Justice is in the process of updating the Americans with Disabilities Act to include online resources of state and local entities. What this means is that universities, state governments, local governments, all need to make sure that the information they have online is accessible to everyone. There are many instances of case law where individuals or groups have filed civil complaints against universities, companies, because they feel that their products are not accessible to people in a way that it should be. So let's just review this for a second. What is web accessibility? What it is making sure that you're making your web accessible for the widest possible audience. This includes people with permanent disabilities and those with temporary disabilities. Currently, the online infrastructure, while a wonderful resource, is hostile to those with disabilities. Another issue you want to think about is that accessibility is inseparable from search engine optimization, mobile technology, and usability. Improve one of these things and you can improve all the others. So what's the best way to accomplish accessibility? It's adherence to standards. As you start now, you're at the very beginning of your web career. It's the perfect time for you to learn the best possible tags and the best possible ways to make your page accessible. These standards are going to come from the W3C Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are called WCAG. And these guidelines are principle, not technology-based. What this means is that you don't need to go out and find the greatest language or the greatest technology to make your page accessible. Instead, you really just need to follow 4 principles as you design your sites. Is my site perceivable? Is it operable? Is it understandable? And is it robust? We'll be talking about these 4 principles throughout our entire course. So let's review quickly. I know that right now you're just starting your web design career and it can be overwhelming. But I'm really hoping that one of the things you'll make sure that you do is design with accessibility in mind. It is the right thing to do for so many reasons. Whether it's because you really want to reach out to the largest customer base you can, or because legally it's required, the important thing is make sure you do it. And the great thing is, accessible design is actually pretty straightforward. All you need to do is adhere to standards. The reason that many pages are inaccessible is because they're trying to be flashy and cool and do things that aren't quite yet fully implemented to standards. So finally, as we go through this class, make sure you pay special attention to the semantics behind HTML tags. These semantics contain special information that are going to make it much easier for people who are using assistive devices to understand the content of your page. Together, we can make sure that the next generation of web developers are designing for the greatest possible audience. Hi, today we're going to talk about the very important but often overlooked process of validating your site. And what I mean by that is it's time for us to check your code. So why do we want to validate? I like to call browsers the helicopter parents of programming. So a lot of times you're going to be writing up your code and then you'll stop and you'll check and it looks great, and then you write some more code and you stop and you check and it looks great. And by the sheer fact that it looks so good, you assume you must be right. But the problem is browsers are programmed to kind of look for your errors and fix them. The problem with this is that not all browsers fix things the same way. It's also important to remember that not everyone is accessing your page with traditional browsers. So as your page becomes more complex, these little hidden problems, little hidden errors that the browsers are hiding can become devastating to people who are trying to access them with different software. So there are three approaches to validating your code for consistency. One is to validate what we call the URI or the URL. Another is to validate by your file name, which means instead of giving your URL, you can actually upload your file to check it. The third way is what I call by direct input. So let's go ahead and run through an example very quickly. And the site I'm going to use is called the validator. So if you check here, we can start off by going to the validator.w3.org. As you can remember, the W3 is really the association for trying to make sure that everyone sticks to the same standards. And here are three options. We can validate by URI, the validate by file upload, and the validate by direct input. Now, this is a somewhat important choice because for some of you, you may not decide to buy a hosting system, in which case you can't actually give it your URL. You can't type in c://. It just doesn't work when you put anything that's specific to your computer. So instead, I'm going to show you an example of validate by direct input. All right? So let's start by looking at the page we're going to validate. Over here, I have my little picture of Asheville with the beach. And as you can see, it looks pretty good. You don't see any problems with it as you kind of go back and forth. But let's see what happens when I actually grab all this code. So if you want the shortcut, this works for almost everyone. I'm going to go ahead and do Control-A and Control-C. Head back over here, and when I put it in and I click on check, once I start going down, you can see, oh, this looks good. Oh, right away it says, nope, you have an error. And the error is stray end tag, and that's for a section. In most cases, the validators can kind of give you a clue as to which line you messed up on. So let's go back and check the code. When I go over here and I go down to line 25, oops, go up a little bit here. Nope, still nothing there. Got really long lines. Oh, the validator was right. As you can see, I accidentally put section twice. What I really meant was to have an end section here and a beginning section here. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. I will save. I will grab it all again. And let's try it by putting in new input. I'm actually going to refresh. Go back here. And let's see if I have better luck this time. Good, good. No errors or warnings to show, and it's going to go ahead and put my page back out there. So this is really just the simplest way to go in and make sure that the syntax of your code is correct. Now, I kind of gave you a really simple example where I only had one error. What typically is going to happen is that it's going to generate lots and lots of errors. And what I want to happen is make sure that you don't freak out when you see all of them. The reason is because errors, what we call, is propagate. The checker gets confused. When you see one error at the top, it kind of leads to a whole bunch of errors. So what you want to do is you always want to fix the first error that the validator saw. Once you fix that, there's a really good chance that the 52 errors it detected has now dropped down to 12 or 11. Now, there's also the chance that once you fix one error, it's going to be able to see that you had 20 or 30 more. But again, work on it step by step. If the error that the validator gives you isn't as clear as the one that I just saw, what you can do is search online and in the different forums, because I can assure you that other people have seen the same errors before. So what you want to do right now, actually let's go back here, is let's go ahead and try validate file by URI. Pick your favorite site and go ahead and type it in. I'm going to go ahead and put in, not my own because I'm pretty sure it validates. I will put in http www.umsi.umich.edu. So my boss can get mad at me when I show his site potentially doesn't validate. Well, right away you can see that it's going to find a lot of errors. No matter what site you put in, particularly if it's a very popular site, you're going to see that there are a lot of errors and that the sites don't validate. Let's make sure your sites are better than theirs. So it's one thing to validate for what we call syntax. It's another question to validate for what we call accessibility. Again, we've talked about how important it is to make sure that your sites are accessible to the greatest number of people. So one of the places you can go to check that is wave.webaim.org. And it's a site for you to go and validate your accessibility. So let's take a look at that one again. I go up here and I go to wave.webaccessibility. What you need to do here is you can't upload your code by file or just by the code itself. You need to put in a URL. So I'm going to go ahead and go to that same one we did before, which was the beaches, and put it in here. And you can see I didn't get any errors, but I did get a couple of alerts. And the alerts were simply telling me that I'm not sure your alternative text is quite as good as it should be. And also another point is saying you have the same redundant link, which means you have the same link twice. So right now everything looks good as far as syntax and the very high level of accessibility for the semantics. So one of the nice things about the accessibility validation is it gives you an idea of things that you hadn't really thought about before, but the downfall is that it only works on hosted pages. So validated sites are always more robust and more accessible than those sites that don't validate. So as a coder, it's your job to make sure that you go to these different validation sites and fix your code to be up to standards. If you're not coding, it's also important for you to visit the sites that you go to on a regular basis and go ahead and validate those. It's going to give you a real sense of the different ways people feel the importance or non-importance of making their sites accessible to everybody. Good luck. One of the things I'm really hoping that students will do is validate their code. You can validate it for syntax, but you can also validate it for accessibility. And so today, I'm going to show you how I use the Wave tool to test different sites. I went in and I checked to find some of the top 10 visited sites for 2018. And I found Google, Wikipedia, Reddit, Yahoo, and Amazon. So let's just do a little investigation to how well each of these sites addresses accessibility. There's two ways to test. One is to actually go to the Wave site, which is wave.webaim.org. From this site, you can actually copy and paste the address of any page you want to test. And this is a great way to do it. Personally, what I did is I went ahead and added the Wave extension to my page. So if you look right here, it's possible, if you own your computer, to download an extension that looks just like this over here. It's a little tiny W. And it makes my life a little bit easier because it lets me actually just click on this button rather than going to the Wave site. So let's go ahead and check out some of these sites. I'm going to start with Google. When I'm at Google, I'll click the Wave validator, and it's going to go through and check for any errors it might see. And in this case, we have 2 errors. And in both cases, the errors are that we have empty links. Somewhere on this page, there are links that don't really link to anything. Now, I'm trying to find them, and you can't see them on here, but that's because Wave checks for all the different variations of your page. So while it might look good on the desktop, it doesn't always look good on, say, your phone or a mobile tablet. Google did pretty well. Let's go ahead and check out Wikipedia. Here on Wikipedia, I'm going to wave it. Oh, sometimes it takes a second. I always forget, and I need to be really patient because if you click on it and then you click on it again too quickly, that's how you turn it on and off. So I clicked on Wave. I'm going to wait for the few more seconds, and you can see that once again, Wikipedia, like Google, did a pretty good job of addressing accessibility. They have one empty button and what they call missing form labels. What that means is down here, there's some place they would like us to type something in. But someone who is vision impaired might not know exactly what is it you want me to type in. So both of these little buttons right here say, you know what? It would be a really good idea if you would add a form label so somebody knows what it is they're typing in. The form label here might be search query, and the form label on this blue button might be hit me to perform search. Still, 3 is really good. So let's go to Reddit. Reddit is a very popular site. A lot of people use it to feel better about themselves because they think, who would ask that question? And other people go here for real reasons to find out information. It's such a popular site, I'm really hoping it'll be accessible. But according to Wave, on their last kind of rendition, Reddit had, let's take a look. All right. And from here we can see that Reddit has 73 errors. Not surprisingly, because there's so much user-driven content. There's a lot of people uploading pictures or typing things in, and they don't know about accessibility. They don't know about things like, wow, I should really be adding my alt text to these different images. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for people to access them. Or you can look down here. In fact, that's exactly what it is. It's missing alternative text here. Oops. Missing alternative text here, missing alternative text. Lots and lots of missing alternative text. The other thing that Wave really tries to get people to avoid doing is having empty links. This idea of links that you don't know where they're going. And they also really don't like redundant links. It just makes it hard for people who are using the computer via a keyboard to have to click so many times to just get to the same information over and over again. So unfortunately, Reddit not great for accessibility, but really good for my example here in this video on checking your pages. The next one I'm going to do is, it just said Yahoo in general, so I picked Yahoo Sports. We can take a look and see how this sports site is going. Now, unlike Reddit, this is, professionally commercial software system where it's people who are being paid to upload the content. So we'll hope that there's a little bit more accessibility here. So here on Yahoo Sports, you can see that I've got 44 errors. So let's go ahead and just kind of take a look at what general things they're missing. Well, it's alternative text, which is kind of funny if you look at it. You can see that they're saying, ooh, lots of places you're missing alternative text. And that must mean right here, each one of these little scores, it's not text, it's actually an image. And this gets people into a lot of trouble. Sometimes you want to put an image up on the screen and it's really not decorative, it's telling a complete story. And in that case, alternative text is so important. Otherwise, people with vision impairment may not be able to see what the score is for the various games. All right, the last one I'm going to do is Amazon. And I think I'll do that one straight from the Wave tool. So I go here, and I typed in Amazon.com. Oh, and Amazon is not doing too badly. You can see they have the same problems that most people do. It always comes down to this missing alternative text right there. There's a few reasons for this. On some sites, it's, the public is uploading the pictures, and they don't know about alternative text, and so we have to educate them about it. Sometimes it's because we've written programs to update the sites. And unfortunately, computers aren't very good at knowing what alternative text they should add to pictures. Unfortunately, it's also because some people do know and they just don't really care or think it's that important. So as much as possible, I want you to add syntactic and semantic clues to all your code. Make sure people who are looking at it or listening to it have the greatest possible experience. One of the other accessibility tools that I've recently come across is called Funkify. Funkify is another extension that you add onto your browser to let you experience visiting pages in a whole different light. So here I am back at wikipedia.org. Earlier in another class I showed that putting it through the Wave validator shows that Wikipedia has really done a pretty good job of making sure their site's accessible. So let's try the Funkify tool. How Funkify works is it lets you take on different personas to try to see what the site would look like for different people. So for instance, if I were to turn on Blurry Bianca, you basically get to experience this page as if you had blurry vision. You can even change the intensity of the blurriness, if that's a word, to have it go from pretty low to pretty high. There's dyslexia, which I think is personally quite interesting because I know so many kids who struggle with, and adults who struggle with the idea that on a web page, oftentimes things are moving around much more quickly, the videos and the pictures, but not just that, the text has a way for moving around with them. You can't solve that problem, but what you can do is make sure that you're using large enough font so that if things do move around, it's not too disorienting. You can always also make sure that your spelling and grammar is correct. That will help as well. All right. The next one is Trembling Trevor. And this one's quite common for people who maybe have a little bit of trouble with a mouse or with a keyboard or different things that need a lot of dexterity. So I'm going to click on this one, and then I'm going to click over here, if I can. And you can see with Trembling Trevor, as I'm trying to move the mouse around, it doesn't move very easily for me. It kind of jumps and goes. I fall victim to this a lot of times myself when people have very tiny buttons to push. So I'm going to turn off Trembling Trevor here. And you can add, kind of increase or decrease the amount of trembling. Tunnel Toby. This is the idea that some people actually, their partial vision loss would look something like this. So this is a pretty high amount of vision loss. You can change it and kind of get this idea of what people are seeing. They might only be seeing a very small amount of your screen. Peripheral vision is this idea that sometimes people have this one spot that's kind of blocked. So again, you can't fix this issue for people, but you can think about your page and you can say, hey, is there something on my page that's really important, like just so important, and it only appears in one spot? Do I want to put it in more? Color Carl is pretty common. This is just the idea that how does your page look if we were to get rid of all the colors? Are you using color? Let's go ahead and do this one. So this is grayscale. I'm going to kind of click in here. You can also look at green, kind of take away a lot of the green. You've got the red and green, the blue and yellow, and they include some statistics that basically 1 in 1,000 people have trouble with this color combination, or 1 in 100 men or 1 in 300 women have problem with the red-green. So testing your site to make sure that color isn't conveying something important. Then they also included some where it's a combination of lowered vision and trembling hands. The last one I kind of like right here is the Sunshine Sue. This is accessibility kind of even more for the accessibility for everyone, because so many people take their devices outside. You can say, oh, hey, if it's really bright outside, are people going to be able to see what's on my screen? Or should I be changing some of my color combinations and contrast? So Funkify is, I mean, I hate to say it's a fun little tool because there's nothing funny about people not being able to access your page. But they did do a good job of trying to explain how these different types of abilities can come in and affect the way that people interact with your page. So if you're interested in accessibility and you want to go a step further to make sure your page is something that everyone can enjoy, I highly recommend you installing Funkify. Hi everybody, today we're going to talk about hosting your site. And what I mean by hosting your site is how you take the pages that you've been working on so far and put them up on the internet for everyone else to see them. In order to host your site, you need two things. You need first a domain name. That's the name that people look at in your URL. The second thing you need is a hosting company, usually called a hosting service. And they are going to be the ones who act as the server for your files to let other people see them. So first, let's talk about domain names. Usually when you go to buy a domain name, you're going to purchase it for multiple years at a time because it really doesn't make that much sense to own your domain name for only a single year, unless of course maybe you're running for an election or doing something where you know you only want it up for a short time. The most common domain names have the domain ending of .com, but more and more the other extensions are gaining acceptance. So if you go to buy a domain name and the only way you can get the name you really want is to use .net or .biz, that's okay. I recommend that you still go ahead and do it. The important thing to know is that domain names by themselves, they're really pretty much completely useless. You can own it, but unless you have files there that people can look at, no one's going to be able to go there and see anything. So this is where the hosting services come in. So if you were to look at your URL right now on your page, when you make a file and you right-click and you're looking at your site in Chrome or Internet Explorer or anything like that, you're probably going to notice that the protocol is file. We don't want that. We don't want it to be file or C:, or My Documents. We want it to be something that looks like www, and that's where the hosting company comes in. So what you need is a registered IP address to connect your domain name with the internet. So hosting services are going to vary. They go from free to what I call mid-range to really full service. And so you need to decide what kind of hosting service best fits you. To be honest, I usually recommend free when you're getting started and then make your way up. But let's talk about the pros and cons of each one. So with free services, you really have little or no control over your domain name. So if you go and look at some other people's, particularly from your school, your work, things where people are not really there just for the domain name, is you're going to see things like wix.whatever, and then your name. You're going to have really limited tools. Sometimes when you pay for a site, you're going to be able to have email registration, different things like that. Free services don't really want to give you too much freedom because they're a little worried about what you're going to do. Probably the worst part about free services is that there's a lot of advertising and redirects. If somebody goes to your site and makes the smallest little typo, rather than getting a nice friendly warning, they're probably going to be redirected to somebody trying to sell something. The nice part about free services is that they have a very familiar look and feel across all of them. If you sign up for one service and learn how to do your hosting on it, you can pretty much rest assured that you're going to be able to manipulate your files on any other free service as well. So let's talk about paid services, both the mid-range and the full. With paid services, you tend to have much better tools for manipulating your code. It's not just about putting your files up on the web. You can do things like have email filters, send out special what we call cron jobs. Cron jobs are different files that you can run at different times of the day. So if you want to have a database, you want to have a list server, you want to have emails, then you might want to pay for the paid services. The other really nice thing about paid services is that there's technical support available to you. So you can go ahead and email, chat, anything you need. You're not going to find that with the free services, or it just won't be quite as good. But before you go for the paid services, I really recommend that you check for free services through work or school as well. A lot of time these free services still have the really great tools and the support, but you just don't have to pay for them. So if in the end you're not quite sure what you want to do, if you want to go with free or paid, I know it can be overwhelming when you decide what you're going to do. So I've simply recommended one site that I know a lot of my students use, and that's ByteHost. You'd go ahead and go to this URL, bytehost.com. Notice that it's BEYTHOST.com. Once you get signed up, you're going to want to make sure that you remember the password that you type in, because they're not going to mail it back to you. And if you can't remember it, it's really going to lead to a lot of problems. In fact, you'll probably end up giving up and signing up for another account. Once you've done that and you've filled it out, you're probably going to need to check your spam, because in that spam, they're going to send you an email that tells you all the details that you're going to need in order to connect through either cPanel or some other type of FTP device. So I hope you're excited, and I hope you're going to take that next step and that you want to go and post your work out on the web. Good luck. Hi, this video is going to be a quick tutorial on the cPanel interface for managing your site. Let's go ahead and say that you've gotten a job or you have homework assignment and someone says, hey, I want you to go ahead and put your site up on the web. Many people's first reaction is, great, how do I do that? So one of the most common ways is to use the cPanel interface. In order to use it, what you need to do is have the URL for your cPanel account or your web hosting account. So if you have a domain name such as introwebdesign.com or yourname.com, when you created your account and you got your domain name and hosting service, they should have sent you an email that says what your URL is. So usually your domain name followed by /cPanel is where you need to go. Once you go there, you come to a nice login where you can access your different files. And I'm going to show you in real time in just a few minutes. So what a file manager does is that it's a way for you to upload or download your files. This means you take them from your computer and you put them up onto the web. So regardless of the kind of cPanel configuration you have, one of the first things you want to learn how to do is figure out how to find the file manager. From the file manager, you're going to look for a special folder called public_HTML, or in some cases just public, or they may have dropped the HTML. But the important thing is that you want to find the word public. Your public HTML folder is going to have a lot of different files, some that you want people to see and some that you don't. I mean, if you think about it, when you go to Amazon or other different sites, there are certain pages they want you to be able to access, but there are many more important confidential files that you should not be able to get to. So uploading files to your public HTML folder makes them viewable to the public. So let's say that we're at my website and I decide I want to upload a new file. In fact, here's the file right here. It's a pretty simple one. It's not even a full file, and it is just file with 2 images of my dog. Okay, so I would go here and I would go to my URL and I would add on cPanel. What should pop up from here is a username and place for me to enter my password. Now, if you're not sure what your username and password are, just make sure to go back to the email that your hosting service sent to you. They'll tell you what it is. So once I log in, you tend to have a fairly familiar site set up when you're using cPanel. Now, different cPanel accounts are going to have different software that you can use, but the one thing that they will all have is something called the File Manager. So head down here, and I find the File Manager. There's going to be lots of different options. I usually just go with the default or find where it says public_HTML. All right, so when I log in, everyone's is going to look different because it depends on what files you've already uploaded. For many of you, the first time you go in, you will only see the CGI bin folder. Go ahead and leave that alone. So I want to upload my file over here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Upload, choose File, and I'm going to pick, oops, it's right up here. Sorry, images, short.html. Here we go. All right, as you can see down in the corner, it's showing that it should be uploading correctly. So go over here, and I want to check and make sure it's there. Oh, it didn't work. And now we want to think about why that didn't work. Okay, so I have here some issues that may have gone on along with the one I already showed you. And that is, wait, why can't I see my file? Well, there are 3 main reasons. The first might be that you typed in the wrong URL. So go back and check that out again. Did I make sure to type in the right file name? Maybe I forgot and I had an S or something else down there. Second, when you uploaded the file, the transfer didn't work. So many times when you're uploading, you want to make sure that there weren't any error messages on the cPanel. The final one, which we'll show you right here, is that when you uploaded the file, did not have what we call read access. And this happens a lot when you're dealing with images. What this means is that your computer said, oh sure, I'll put this file on your site, but I'm not going to let anybody else see it. So what we need to do is we need to go in and we need to change the permissions for that image. And I can show you how to do it right now. So one of the things that I want to do is I want to look at the code that was uploaded to the server. So I'm going to go ahead and I did a right click, and I'm going to do View Page Source. And you can see that it says the pictures that it's looking for are both called Bacon, and they're inside an Images folder. Oh, well that's where my first mistake was. Let's go back over here, and you can see, oh great, I'm going to reload it. Here's that file, HTML file uploaded. I completely forgot to upload the images that go with the HTML file. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder, call it Images, and I'm going to upload it. And from there, I am going to upload the picture. Great. So let's go over and check and see how we're doing. Oops, that's not the right one. I'm going to refresh it. Oh great, look, it worked for one of my files, but not the other. So let's look at that source code one more time. And you can see that I put in an intentional mistake. When you're working locally, when you're creating files on your C drive or your desktop, your browser is very nice. It's kind of like the helicopter parenting of browsers. And it'll say, oh, I know what she meant. So here, I put the wrong file extension. I used capital JPG instead of lowercase. So while it was great for then, that's not so great now. So what I want to do is I want to go back over here, go up one folder. I'm going to what we call work on this here, code editor. And I'm going to change this to JPEG. Let's see how it goes. Great. Now our pictures are working. So what you may notice is that I went in and I changed my file it was on the server. There are two different ways to change your files. One is you can edit your files via cPanel, but I don't normally do that. Instead, what I like to do is I like to work locally, which means I only change my files when they're on my laptop or my desktop. The reason that I don't like to make changes on cPanel is that, first of all, the changes are immediately public. So if you put in a typo or something you didn't mean to have, it's out there and you can't really fix it. Secondly, there's less opportunity to test and debug. So sometimes during my lectures, I may show you that I'm working on files on cPanel, but I really avoid doing that. So at some point, you are more than likely to be using cPanel to upload files to your server. Different versions of cPanels are going to offer different tools depending on if you're using a paid or a free site. Even among paid sites, there are many different variations. One of the things that you should do if you're interested in becoming more of an administrator is look into the different administrative tools that cPanel often offers. There are emails accounts, database management, and cron jobs. Cron jobs are one of my favorite because I teach all my freshmen how to have their email automatically sent to their mothers at 9 a.m. saying they're studying hard. An alternative to using cPanel is to use something such as SFTP to transfer files or other file transfer protocols. But the important thing to do is to learn that when you're using cPanel, you're going to make little mistakes and little things aren't going to work. The important thing to do is to relax, go in, and follow the 3 steps I mentioned. Make sure you uploaded the file, make sure you don't have any typos, and make sure that you have the permissions set to the way they need to be. If you do that, you should be fine. One way that you can share your web page with everyone is by hosting it on GitHub. So the first step is making a GitHub Pages account. So I'm going to go in here and pick a username. As I type it in, it's going to let me know if somebody already has that one or not. So here we go. I've created Web Designer for everyone. Make sure that whatever username you pick makes sense because this is going to be part of the URL for your site. So pick something simple, not a lot of upper or lowercase, and something that really kind of describes why you're building your site. Go ahead and put in an email. And a password. Okay. Once you've logged in, what you want to do is you want to create your account. So when you click on create an account, what's going to happen is that they're going to send you, well, first you have to decide what kind of plan you want. We're going to go with the free plan. We don't need anything special, and you don't really need to probably get updates from GitHub News or anything like that. We're just going to hit continue. All right. Again, no need to share any type of special information about yourself. I'm just going to go ahead and click on, well, skip this step, I guess, because I didn't add anything. And now we can go ahead and get started. The first thing we need to do is we need to create something called a repository. And a repository is a place where you put your code on the web. Think of it like making a folder on your desktop. Maybe you've made a folder called HTML where you've been putting all your files. This is the name of the folder that we're going to put up on the web. So this is very important that you follow the rules very exactly. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to the very top corner and you'll see a plus. When you click on the plus, there's something that says New Repository. And this is the point where it's going to stop and ask you to verify your email address. I'm going to go ahead and do that now. 3, 2. Once you verify your email, it should bring you back to this page. So I'm going to try clicking on the plus again and saying new repository. All right. This is where it's very important. This repository name has to be the same as your account name. So in my case, it's Web Designer for Everyone .github.io. In my description, I can go ahead and put something like the website for web design for everyone. And the second thing you really want to make sure you do is click on this little button down here that says initialize this repository with a README. Okay, that's it. I'm going to click create. And it takes sometimes a few seconds just to make me kind of see, everyone can see that README that I clicked on, that I created, it automatically generated a site called Web Designer for Everyone. Oops. .github.io. Oh, I messed up. I need to rename this because it was supposed to be oh, actually, I was wrong. It is Web Designer for Everyone. I typed my account name wrong. We're all good. As long as this part right here, it has to match the name of your account up here. All right. So now it's time to check to see if I have made a live website for everyone to see. So I'm going to copy this link right here. webdesignerforeveryone.github.io. I'm going to copy it. And I am going to see what happens if we go here. And look, I actually have a website that's live to everyone. I didn't have to pay for anything. I didn't have to sign up for anything. And GitHub Pages is generally accepted by everyone as a fairly secure place to put your code. Now, I haven't put any real code yet, and I'm going to cover that in a separate video because I want to keep the two ideas separate. Creating your GitHub account, which you only have to do once, and then uploading your code to GitHub, which you'll have to do multiple times. Now, just a few notes. Take a few seconds between each step that I covered here. GitHub can get very busy, and sometimes it might take a few minutes for something to happen between you clicking OK or accept or upload. But hopefully, from here, you won't have too much problems. In the readings, I'll include links to other places you can look for help in creating your GitHub Pages account. So let's say you've come up with a pretty nice site. In fact, I've got one right here. I'm going to click on my index.html file, and I've got some images in it. I have a special file called CSS that you might not be familiar with yet, but that's okay. But let's just see what my site looks like. Here we go. Here's just a little page I made about me with a little bit of formatting. But if you check and you kind of look in the upper corner, you can see that this site is not live. The fact that it says file : forward, I can't share it with other people live. I can email them my code. I could say to somebody, oh, look, I made a web page. And then I could send them this file and all the images and everything like that. But that's kind of a pain. So let's try to make this site go live on my GitHub Pages account. So go back here to my GitHub account, which if you haven't created yet, that's okay. I've got another video. Go create your account and come back here and meet up with us. But other than that, I'm going to make my first kind of live account. Once again, I'm going to go up and do a plus for a new repository. Basically consider it a new folder full of code. Last time I needed to be very careful with my repository name. Not this time. I'm just going to call this one, let's say, sample. SAMPLE. I try very hard to keep it to all lowercase. You can include the little like dash, but no special characters. So I'm just going to leave it as sample. Very important, I'm going to click on initialize this repository with a README. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click on create repository. So GitHub right now is creating a new site for me to upload my code. Now, people who use GitHub for, I'm going to say like real, are actually doing a lot of things from command lines, and they have to memorize a lot of stuff. We're not doing that. We're just using GitHub pages to host our code. So let's click on Upload Files. Now, here's a tricky part. If I were to click on Choose Your Files, I could do that, and I could kind of go through and pick, well, I need this file and that one, but it won't let me upload entire folders. See, if I click on CSS and I click on Open, it's like, oh, is this the file you want? And I don't want this. I want everything, not just files. So I clicked on Add. What I'm going to do is go over here, and I'm just going to go back up one. And I'm just going to drag this whole folder over all at once. And this is going to let me upload as many files as I want. The next mistake I make all the time is that I forget to go all the way down to the bottom and say commit changes. All right. So this is the first step out of 2 steps of making your site go live. The first step is just to upload your files. Again, this may take a few minutes to complete. So while that's going on, I'm going to go up. Oh, there we go, done. I'm going to go up. So what I'm going to click on now is I'm going to go up and click on Settings. All right. Now, what I need to do is I need to say, hey, if somebody wants to see my site, I don't want them to see my code. I want them to see my actual page. So I'm going to go back down here, and I'm going to scroll down. Sorry, I figure out how to scroll down on this mouse. And what I'm looking for is a site that says GitHub Pages. Go to None and choose Master Branch and save. All right. You never really know if it worked or not. So I'm going to go back down again, click over here and go back down. And if I go down to GitHub Pages, it will now tell me, hey, your code is now right here. So I'm going to click on this, and it's not uncommon for it to say, hey, you don't have anything yet, or something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my code and say, okay, what was the name of that folder I dragged up? Oh, it was Sampler. Okay. And what was the name of my file? Hopefully it was index.html, and it is. Great. I'm going to go right here. And now, when I click, I got a 404 error. Don't worry, that's going to happen a lot. First thing to check is, did you put in a typo? Yes, I did. I wrote sample instead of sampler. So let's put that R in there. Now I'm going to hit enter, and there's my site. All right. So what you can do, the 2 steps for creating this GitHub account is to upload your file and then change that kind of link for GitHub Pages to turn it on. Once you do that, you can upload as many things as you want. I am going to do one more thing with you real quick, though. I'm going to go back to my GitHub account. And I'm going to do this one more time, but slightly different. All right, oops. I want to go to github.com. I'm going to make one more repository. I'm going to call this one Sample2. And this time I'm going to forget, and I'm not going to click on this README. I'm going to click on the repository. Oh, well, now there's no place for me to click on that upload files, and you feel kind of stuck. If you forget, just scroll right up to the README link on the page, and you click on it, and it automatically creates the README. I'm going to go down. Just so you know, commit new file is the equivalent of save files for what we do on our desktop. So now I can upload files. I'm going to do it one more time to show you another, probably easier way. I'm going to go back here. Before, I dragged the entire sampler folder. This time, I'm just going to grab here. They're all uploading. I'm going to click on Commit Changes. while this is happening, I want you to think, all right, what was that second step? What was that next step she said I had to do? And that step is to go into settings and add the GitHub pages. So let's go up to settings. Oh, it's gonna, right here. Scroll down. Add master branch and save. And then since I want to be a little lazy, I'm just going to scroll down here again and be like, oh great, here's the link to my site. I'm going to click on it. Again, when you get the 404 error, there's usually two reasons. Either you spelled something wrong, which isn't the case here because we clicked on it, we didn't type anything in. Or you need to give GitHub a few more minutes to upload everything. Or the third one is sometimes, I'm not, to be honest, exactly sure why, but sometimes GitHub seems to almost forget to look for the index.html file. So I'll hit enter, and there we go. So GitHub Pages is a great free way for you to host your code and share it with everyone who you think will be impressed with your incredible work. Hi, in today's lecture, we're going to talk about SFTP, which stands for Secure File Transfer Protocol. What this is, it's a fast way for you to move your files that you've been creating out onto the web. So secure file transfer is just really a common way of moving files from your computer off to either someone else's computer, off to your server, or even up to some other computer that's within your business. People use the terms FTP and SFTP interchangeably. What's important for you to know is that the S stands for secure. So a lot of times people are going to require that you use the SFTP protocol instead of the FTP protocol. So when I say the word protocol, hopefully in your mind that's causing a little bit of a flashback into our early lectures when we talked about how browsers interact with the files that are sent to them. So with HTTP or HTTPS, your browser knows, oh, here's a file that she wants me to display. I should ignore all the tags and go ahead and put up a nice site for them. In the same way, you may have seen that there's a file protocol, which works pretty much the same way and says they've been making a web page and it's been existing on their computer. With SFTP or FTP, what is going on is the browser is being told, don't display these files. We actually want you to transfer them from one computer to another. What's also really nice about most FTP or SFTP software programs is that they let you drag and drop the files instead of uploading them one at a time. So let's say that you're ready to go ahead and do secure file transfer. There's a few things that you're going to need. The first is you're going to need what we call an FTP client. What this is a software that you will use to connect between the different machines. If you're using a PC, a common software program is WinSCP. If you're using a Mac, many people use Fugu or CyberDuck. No matter which one of these three programs you want to use, they're all free for download. Once you have your client, you need to go back and find out what the FTP address for your host is. When you signed up for a hosting service, they probably sent you an email that was full of information that you didn't really understand. It's time for you to finally dive into that email and start using the information. So let's go ahead and do it together. So here's the email that my hosting service sent to me with all the information I was going to need to connect to my site. Now, if you look, I have different things such as my account details and the site administration that tells me how I can connect if I was going to use something called cPanel. But since I'm using FTP, or in my case SFTP, what I need to know is the address, the port, and then there's also my username and my password. In many cases, they don't specify a port, but my particular hosting service did. So let's go ahead and copy this, and I'm going to log on with CyberDuck. Now, as many of you bring up CyberDuck, some of you may end up having a picture or a little graphic very similar to mine. If nothing showed up, what I want you to do is go up to the top, and you should have a file. And this is true if you're using WinSCP or Fugu instead. And you're going to want to go to Open Connection, and that's what brought me up here. So when I click on Open Connection, one of the first things you need to decide is whether you're going to be using FTP or SFTP. Next, you need to put in your server, and if you need to, your port. Finally, go ahead and put in your username and password. Hopefully you've remembered all that information and the connection's going to pop up for you. Don't be surprised if you forgot once or twice what that connection is and if it pops up a warning. All right, once your window pops up, you're going to see that you have a few different folders. These different folders contain different information that your hosting service may or may not want to be shared. So for instance, think about any website that you go to, such as Facebook, Amazon. What's going on is that there are a lot of files that are going into building these sites, but they only want you to be able to see some of them. And those files that they want you to see, they need to reside in the public HTML folder. So when I go in here, what I want to just warn you about is that when I click on the public HTML folder and you click on it, it's going to look very different. The reason for that is that I've already uploaded a lot of files, and for you, it's most likely that the only file that's in there is something called CGI bin, and you want to just pretty much leave that one alone. Now, what you want to do next is start dragging and dropping some of the files that you want to see. So let's go ahead and look at a site that I can use as an example. I'm going to go ahead and bring this open. And it's just a little site I have about Ashtabula. It's got a picture and a couple maps on it. And if I go to the intro website, you can see that it doesn't exist there. There's nothing there. We get a 404, which means, hey, you asked for this file and it doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and move those files over using CyberDuck. So all the code I want to upload is over here. It's in a folder called Ashtabula. With many other services, I would need to go in and upload each file one by one. But instead, I'm going to drag this entire folder over and drop it in. By the way, when you drop it in, make sure you're dropping it in right into public HTML, not into a subfolder if you have one, not into CGI bin. Great, so there's Ashtabula. Let's try reloading my folder. And you can see that I come very close to success. I've got the two maps, but the top picture is missing. Instead, all we see is the alt text. It's basically saying, I can't find that picture. So let's take a look and see what it's supposed to be looking at. I'm going to go to right-click, Inspect Element, and you can see it says, hey, I cannot find this picture down here. You're asking me to upload something called harborjty.jpg. I don't know what that is. All right, let's check out CyberDuck. Here's Ashtabula, here's images, and you can see, oh, but the picture's right there. But if you look really closely, you can see I used lowercase h over here and an uppercase h over here. I need to change the code. There are two ways you can do that. You can either edit it right within here, or you can change it on your computer and drag it up again. Let's go ahead and just edit it right here. Oops. Actually, that's not, because that's the picture. What I really want to edit is the HTML file. I'm glad I made that mistake. Keeps you from making it yourself. So I'm going to change this lowercase h to an uppercase H, save it, and let's try reloading. Boom. Success. We've got the file just as we wanted it. Now, anytime that you change a file, you're going to have to remember that any changes you make, you need to drag and drop back up. All right? So that's one of the main reasons people have trouble with FTP, is that they forget what they've uploaded and what they haven't. That's why I really like the ability to drag an entire folder over one at a time, as well as individual files. Let's go ahead and review just a little bit. You can upload your files many ways. You can use cPanel, you can use Fugu, you can use CyberDuck, you can use WinSCP. There isn't a single right way to do it. But the most important thing is, before you can go ahead and use any of these software tools, it's important for you to know your login information. So hold on to that email when your hosting service sends it to you. You'll be really glad you did. Good luck. Hi, let's talk about the final project you're going to do for this course. The last thing I want you to do is basically take the elements, take the tags, take the syntax that you've been learning about over these past few weeks, and put them together to create an example page. You'll be provided with a screenshot as a template for what I want you to build, but it's always easier if someone can tell you in words what goes along with the picture. When you make this page, the most important thing I want you to realize is that there are no tricks. I'm really just testing for syntactic accuracy. So let's take a look at the site you're going to be creating. Here's the site right now. Depending on what size screen you're looking at, it can look really different. So just for fun, I'm going to resize my browser just to give people an idea that I really haven't styled this to do anything particular. When I make it smaller, things move around. I don't care where things lay out on your screen. I'm more worried about the fact that each element is there. I also wanted to point out that, as you can notice, some of the elements are in yellow and others are just in regular color. Anything that's in yellow is something that you should change specifically to you. So in this case, I have Colleen Van Lent in yellow. You should really use your name instead. I have a list of my favorite foods. I really want you to pick your favorite foods. I've got a little thing along the bottom that says progress and life goals. Again, pick your own value. So every place that you see yellow, I want you to change to your own particular interests, names, values. Okay? The other thing I want to point out is right down here where you see the more about me, this is actually part of a details tag. When I click on it, you can see that it opens and closes. And this is another place where I want to put more information about you, not about me. Now, if you were looking at my site on Firefox, or if you're developing in Firefox, I just wanted to let you know that this tag doesn't work. Instead, it would always show up as open. That's fine. If that's the type of browser you've been testing on, continue to do so. I just didn't want you to get worried when it didn't seem to open and close like for everyone else. All right? So go ahead. You're going to make sure that you have a header up here, a navigation bar here. This is one section and another section. And again, the picture may seem big or small. I don't really care what it looks like. What I care about is your ability to write HTML5 code. So good luck as you write your code. I know you're going to do great, and it's important to just take small steps and get each one to work individually. When you're done, you're going to have something that you can be really proud of. Hi everybody. I'm not sure if I should say welcome back or goodbye because this is the end of the class. I know that you might be a little bit surprised, like, what? That's it? I don't feel like I'm ready to be a web developer yet. Well, I'm here to tell you, you're not ready to be a web developer. But what you have learned is that with the exception of a few things called forms and a little bit about graphics, you have learned the bulk of the HTML5 tags. You've learned their syntax and their semantics. All right? With that information, you are now ready to go off and learn even more about the areas that really interest you in particular, whether that's design, accessibility, user experience. And it's very important that you had this basic understanding before you go on to these other ideas. So let's think about some of the things you learned. One of the first tools that's now in your tool belt is that you can view and edit files and code, which is something a lot of people have difficulty with. You can use that editor to modify an existing HTML file. You can create one from scratch. There's a lot of different things that you can do using the editors that you've now mastered. You also know the different options for opening a file. I'm not sure if you remember, but just a few short weeks ago, when you saw an HTML file, probably the only thing you could do was open it in a browser. Now you know how to do many more things than that. You also are at the very beginning of learning how to evaluate for accessibility. From the first step of viewing other people's source code and looking for those semantic tags, you know the importance that these tags have for people who want to access your page. You also have the ability to go to thevalidator.org to check for well-structured syntactic code, or to go to WebAIM to check for that semantic structure that people may or may not be using in their code. Again, the ability to evaluate accessibility is something that we really need more and more people to know. Finally, you also hopefully know how to publish your site, or at the very least you know the basics if you do decide to publish in the future. You know about domain names, you know about hosting, and you know that you really don't want to buy that one domain name they keep trying to sell you in the Super Bowl unless you're also willing to buy a host. You've also achieved some familiarity, no matter how small, with so many systems that are out there. You've learned about cPanel, you've learned about FTP, you've learned about different browsers, and you've learned about different types of editors. And this is all information you can use to expand your knowledge in other areas. So what should you do next? If you found this course interesting, what you really want to do is you want to practice your skills. Keep writing code, keep using tags. If there's a tag you're not sure about, that's especially the one that you want to practice with. You want to get comfortable with multiple editors. If you've been using Notepad++, try Sublime. If you've been using Sublime, try Text Wrangler. Keep working with different editors, and while you're at it, try different browsers too. Try uploading your code. If you didn't host your site, I really encourage you to find a free hosting service and try putting it out there. Because once you can share your code with other people, you get much more motivated to do new things. And finally, the most important thing you probably want to do is learn about cascading style sheets. Cascading style sheets is the method you're going to use to take your plain, everyday HTML file and make it look like something really special. Of course, I happen to be offering a course in CSS 3, and I hope you'll join me for that. But if you decided that you just don't have the time to do that, I want to let you know that when this course is over and after you've submitted your final project, I will be sending you a link to what I call my secret lecture. And in that secret lecture, I want to show you ways that you can style your page in very simple steps. And I hope it's something you'll enjoy and help you to continue your journey into HTML5.